Hello! Hello and welcome to an extra special episode of the Super Bunny Hop Super Poverty Fight Stream. Where I really, let me lower this real quick. Where I really needed that laugh that you might have heard me, chuckling, behind the microphone feedback of that intro. I still find that thing funny to a certain extent in my dark times. I did something today that makes me feel brave. Yay! It's something I was really worried about receiving some kind of stupid retaliation for, but it was the right thing to do. Hey kids, if you want to get pumped up to fight your HOA, spend a year studying Napoleon and making your own custom cut of various adaptations of Homer's Odyssey. We have a wild concept for a stream that I got an idea for last week, and that is to do a big brain gamer genius Friday strategy stream where we're going to play Advance Wars by Web with fans and strangers alike, and if that gets old we'll play chess.com, but we're gonna do it in maybe 15 or 10 minute intervals where I we'll be playing some open yield courses. I found a good one here. I love these things. I love the good ones. Most of them are good. This one is, I should post some information about this. It's their Intro to Psychology course. And it's very important because it will teach you not to use Skinnerian principles to raise your children. If you want to, oh, that just cut off kind of harshly. Let's scrub through here. Yeah, there we go. If you want to raise a baby genius and not a gamer weirdo, you want to apply Skinnerian principles to your parentage techniques. And there's some very funny stories, I don't know if we'll get to them or not, about how when Skinner, the guy behind the Skinner box, was a popular psychologist for a few decades in the early 1900s, his theories gradually became outdated over the following decades, replaced with a French guy whose name sounds Italian, who begins with an R. It's something like Rosarino. Anyways, the point is, the Skinnerian principles were popular for raising children for as long as it took psychologists to find out that actually they're more useful for training animals. I feel so sorry for all the babies of that generation who grew up into experiencing their early years a little bit closer to how animals do. But in any case, some of these are wild. And as I learned last week, apply Skinnerian principles directly to the forehead. Yeah, it's going to be a great concept. I'm going to be Roller 42's on something here. Peak stream. We're getting mentally and culturally enriched. And what I learned during some of my worst years going through the post-pandemic depression and steadily realizing that a fight with the HOA is going to have to happen eventually, or else the building's just going to get worse and my brain is going to get worse, is that playing some kind of basic strategy game with your fingers while you listen with your brain to a lecture is, or a puzzle game, like a game that requires a little bit of brain, but by the time you learn it, it's really more fingers and muscle memory and just instantly recognizing the optimal strat from a scene within the frame time. It keeps you like, if you have distractive tendencies from the doom scrolling and all the smartphone addiction going on, it really helps you keep focused on the lectures in a very nice way, keeps your fingers busy away from the smartphone doom scrolling, and also weirdly helped me retain some information better than otherwise, kind of sort of a similar phenomenon to how if you're jotting down notes in the lecture hall, you tend to remember the lecture a little bit better. I wasn't jotting down notes, so I'm not going to claim to anyone that I actually got a full education in the lectures I was listening to. I wasn't doing the readings either, quite shamefully. But I did retain a lot more than I noticed if I listened to these things while doing chores or taking a drive. So yeah, Trig, you apply Skinnerian principles directly to the forehead. Another one of the greatest ironies is that the Skinner box, kind of sort of begrudgingly and controversially, became loved by psychologically exploitive game designers. A lot of really bad psychological principles that we might learn about, depending on how many of these lectures we go through, are being utilized by big famous game designers right now to create what most gamers will colloquially refer to as fun. One thing of which that really bugs me and makes me feel patronized too is how every when you're playing an open world action game, there's always some little herb or something on the ground, a little flower that you can pick to craft into potions or whatever that game's version of that mechanic is. And they show up at a very predictable pace, about 7 seconds per little herb you bounce across. 7 to 14 seconds, I would wager. Every 7 to 14 seconds, games assume that they got to dangle a Skinner carrot in front of you in your Skinner box, and they don't give you much time these days to sit back and listen to your own self think in ways that I have noticed myself rediscovering and loving with some older games and weird indie games. When it comes to big budget AAA games that have to take as little risks as possible, I would absolutely not be surprised if part of the very cynical, corporate motivated minutiae of the game design is going to be utilizing psychological principles that the psychological world nowadays by and large considers outdated, bad, exploitive, mentally unhealthy, destructive habits to be in. And maybe we'll learn about a few of them here today. So if we don't have any questions, let's see if I have any Discord requests. Do I have any games waiting on me? My username on Advanced Wars by Web is SBHGeorge, as we can see in the corner here. And there are some fans who are probably going to request to play games with me. But what I've noticed is that, and I'm a little iffy by, is that these things are taking a while. Is there a way to measure the real time these games last? I'm hoping that I'll be able to play through multiple, but last time I ended up keeping the stream going a little later than I'd like. I might not have found my sweet spot as I climbed the learning curve for the kind of rapid, fast-paced, decisive 10-minute bullet chess style games that I really fell in love with on chess.com. What I want is the live queue, I believe. Yeah, standard mode, funds, fog off, unrated, or sure. Let's see. Do we have any words about time on here? Yeah, Trig. Engagement isn't always fun, and it's a shame most devs can't tell the difference. I agree. I feel like they are using a very scary amount of data to create player heat maps of playtesters when developing open world games to chart out their every single footstep through the open world to make sure that no matter who you are and how you play the game, you'll hit something in 7 seconds. And it doesn't feel natural. The real world is full of empty space that doesn't have a lot interesting going on. Sometimes there maybe should be nothing in the cave because it's a freaking cave, and the journey is more important than the destination. And in classical Nintendo style game design, there's always some kind of little trinket in the cave, and that seems to have evolved to the point where they now have giant open world games full of tens upon tens of caves, and it does feel a little natural that there's going to be something at the bottom of every single one of those, and eventually at some point you start noticing the pattern, and you realize that you've been psychologically tricked into thinking that something fake is really something more natural and organic and realistic, and it just feels patronizing after a while and causes George to become burnt out. I need to experiment with more genres and weird indie games and classic games that I haven't played to reactivate the passion, because that has thoroughly been a tested and proven method at this point. One of which is this big-brained strategy gamer stream we are going to be enjoying tonight. Let's set this to standard, join queue, and see what happens. I'm going to begin the lecture in 3, 2, 1, shabamzo. Oh, this is good. So, as I briefly panicked and worried about last...
welcome people to Introduction to Psychology.
I can't talk.
My name is Dr. Paul Bloom, and I'm the professor for this course.
Can't talk over him.
If you haven't yet picked up a syllabus from the front of the class, please raise your hand. Are we out? Are we at a syllabi? Oh, please raise your hand, and when the teaching fellows will bring it to you.
Oh, no. This is going to be the super lame first lecture, where he's just going to...
The syllabus is also available on this website. This website will become important to you should you choose to take this class. It will include...
This isn't for us.
Which will occasionally be revised well in advance. Also, all of the class material will be on this site, including copies of the slides I'm presenting, including these slides right now, practice exams, and any details on the written assignments. So you'll need to use this website regularly to keep in touch with the course. Today will be a short class. What I just want to do today is orient you, tell you what this course is about. I know this is shopping period, and I want to give you a good sense of what you'd be in for if you took this course. I want to go over the style of the classes, the evaluation, the readings, and so on, and then give some examples of some of the specific topics that we'll be covering. But before I get started, I have to point out something a little bit unusual about this class. We are being filmed. This course is one of 7 courses chosen to begin the Yale University Open Educational Resources Video Lecture Project. And what this means is that when the year is over, these videos will be available on the internet free for anybody who wants to see them. And ideally will be accessed by people across many different countries, some who would not normally have access to a university education.
How noble.
I see this as a good and honorable use of Yale's resources.
There we go.
And of course, it's also part of Yale's plan for world domination. So because of this, a Yale University production team from the Center of Media Initiatives is going to be taking all the class. The idea is that this should be as unobtrusive as possible. And the classroom experience should essentially be the same as if they're not there. So it's their intention to tape the lectures, to tape me and sometimes the slides, but not tape your faces or voices, so we're not having you sign release forms.
Oh, good.
2 things. One thing is, personally, I have to remind myself...
I don't want any of the...
watching, so I'll try not to do that.
Of anyone watching this to you know, put the classmates on 4chan or anything.
Second row or the third row. It is possible that some part of your head, your back, or even your face might end up on film. If you are in the witness protection program, or you're some sort of fugitive, you probably don't want to sit in the front row. I'll give them, if people want to unobtrusively kind of slide back, that's fine as I'm talking. Okay, we're ready. So I'd like to welcome people to this course, Introduction to Psychology. My name is Dr. Paul Bloom. I'm professor of this course. And what this is going to be is a comprehensive introduction to the study of the human mind. So we're going to cover a very, very wide range of topics, including brains, children, language, sex, memory, madness, discuss racism and love.
Oh, I can't wait to get to madness. Madness, madness.
Like the proper explanation for differences between men and women. The question of whether animals can learn language. The puzzle of what grosses us out. The problem of why some of us eat too much and what we could do to stop. The question of why people go crazy in groups. Research into whether you can trust your childhood memories. Research into why some of us get depressed and others don't. The style of this
is this 5-minute long wait time for a match normal?
As well as course readings.
Maybe I should set it to unrated or rated.
You have to attend both the lectures and do the readings. There will be some overlap. In some cases, the lectures will be quite linked to the readings, but there will be some parts of the readings that will not find their way into the lectures, and some lectures, some entire lectures, that will not connect at all to the readings. So to pursue this course properly, you have to do both. What this means is that if you miss a class, you need to get notes. And so you should get them from a friend or from the person sitting next to you. The slides are going to be made available online. So one of the things you don't have to do is you don't have to write this down.
I'm thinking of restarting the queue by picking rated or unrated.
It'll be available online. I'm going to post it in a format which will be black and white and easy to print out. So you don't have to worry about this. But again, attending to the slides is not a substitute for attending class. There's a textbook, Peter Gray's Psychology, 5th edition. And there's also a collection of short readings, The Norton Reader, edited by Gary Marcus. It's an excellent textbook. It's an excellent collection.
6 minutes.
You should get them both. They're available at Labyrinth Bookstore on York Street, or you can get them online. I should note that last time I taught the course, I used the Marcus Reader. And when Professor Marvin Chun taught his course last semester, he used Peter Gray's 5th edition textbook. So there may be a lot of used copies floating around. You should feel free to try to get one of those. The evaluation goes like this. There is a midterm and there's a final. The final will not be held in the exam period because I like to take long vacations. It will be held the last day of class. The exams will be multiple choice and short answer, fill in the blank, that sort of thing. Prior to the exams, I will post previous exams online so you have a feeling for how these exams work and so on. There will also be review sessions. Starting at the beginning of the 3rd week of class, that is not next week, but the week after, on Monday, each Monday, I'm going to put up a brief question or set of questions which you have to answer. And your answers need to be sent to your teaching fellow, and you'll be given a teaching fellow, assigned one, by Friday. This is not meant to be difficult. It's not meant to be more than 5-10 minutes of work. But the point of the question, 15-20 minutes of work. But the point of the question is to motivate people to keep up with the material and do the readings. These questions will be marked pass-fail. I expect most everybody to pass all of the questions. But it's just to keep you on track and keep you going. There's a book review, a short book review to be written towards near the end of the class. I'll give details about that later on in the semester. And there's also an experimental participation requirement. And next week I'll hand out a piece of paper describing the requirement. The point of the requirement is to give you all experience actually seeing what psychological research is about, as well as to give us hundreds of subjects.
I am going to restart the queue.
The issue sometimes comes up as to how to do well in the course. Here's how to do well. Attend all the classes, keep up with the readings, ideally keep up with the readings before you come to class.
Aha! Look at how much faster that was.
To form some sort of study groups, either formally or informally. Have people you could talk to when the prior to the exams.
Oh, did they leave?
Her. I hope you know him.
Okay.
And
where'd the game go?
In fact, what I'm going to do, not this
Oh
class,
man,
because
oh
it's
man, am I
coming
leaving them
next
waiting
class
now?
or what,
Waiting
but
for
I'll set up a few
opponent.
minutes
Your game's
prior
okay.
at the beginning of class for people just to introduce themselves to the person next to them.
Wait, did I find a game or
So to have
not?
some sort of resource in the class. Now, this is a large class, and if you don't do anything about it, it can be very anonymous. And some of you may choose to pursue it that way, and that's totally fine. But what I would suggest you do is establish some contact with us, either with me or with any of the teaching fellows, and I'll
Game created.
sometime
Ready.
next week. You could talk to us at the beginning or the end of class. Unless there's special circumstances, I always try to come at least 10 minutes early, and I'm willing to stay late to talk to people. You could come by during my office hours, which are on the syllabus, and you could send me email and set up an appointment. I'm very willing to talk to students about intellectual ideas, about course problems, and so on. And if
Ready.
you see me at some
Okay,
point
yeah, I
just
see
on
the check mark.
campus,
I'm good.
you could introduce yourself, and I'd like to meet people from this class. So again, I want to stress, You have the option of staying anonymous in this class, but you also have the option of seeking out and making some sort of contact with us.
Ready.
Okay.
I'm ready.
That's the formal stuff of the course.
Is it normal
What's
for them to
this
take
course
so
about?
long?
Unlike a lot of other courses, some people come to intro psychology with some unusual motivations. Maybe you're crazy and hope to become less crazy.
Yes. Guilty as charged.
Maybe you want to learn how to study better, improve your sex life, interpret your dreams, and win friends and influence
Can
people.
we get back to madness, please?
Those are not necessarily bad reasons to take this course. And with the exception of the sex part, this course might actually help you out with some of these things. The study of scientific psychology has a lot of real-world relevance to.
How come none of the kids in the class laughed at that?
And I'm going to try, and when these issues come up, I'm going to try to stress them and make you try to think about the extent to which the laboratory research I'll be talking about can affect your everyday life.
All right.
How you study, how you interact with people, how you might try to persuade somebody of something else, what sort of therapy works best for you. But the general goals of this course are actually, I think, even more interesting than that. What I want to do is provide a state-of-the-art introduction to the most important topic that there is, us, how the human mind works, how we think, what makes us what we are. And we'll be approaching this from a range of directions. So traditionally, psychology is often broken up into the following, into 5
My opponent missed a
sub-areas.
base.
Neuroscience, which is the study of the mind by looking at the brain. Developmental, which is the area which I focus mostly on, which is trying to learn about how people develop and grow and learn. Cognitive, which is the one term of the 5 that might be unfamiliar to some of you, but it refers to a sort of computational approach to studying the mind, often viewing the mind on analogy with a computer and looking at how people do things like understand language, recognize objects, play games, and so on.
Yeah, he said it.
Which is the study of how people act in groups, how people act with other people. And there is clinical, which is maybe the aspect of psychology that people think of immediately when they hear psychology, which is the study of mental health and mental illness. And we'll be covering all of those areas. We'll also be covering a set of related areas. I am convinced that you cannot study the mind solely by looking at the discipline of psychology. The discipline of psychology spills over to issues of how the mind has evolved. Economics and game theory are now an essential tools for understanding.
Okay, so this is called an adder mirror when it's adder versus adder.
Philosophy, computer science, anthropology, literature, theology.
Let me refresh myself. He speeds your guys up. Yeah,
So
+1 movement, +2 movement. That's
wide
real
range
easy to
in that sense.
conceptualize for a
At
beginner.
this point, I've been speaking in generalities, so I want to close this introductory class by giving 5 examples of the sorts of topics we'll be covering. And I'll start with the topic that we'll be covering next week, on Monday. The brain. This is a brain. In fact, it's a specific person's brain.
Oh, they don't show the slides, so
What's
you don't get
interesting
to...
about the brain is that little white mark there.
So you just got to visualize.
It's Terry Schiavo's brain. You recognize her more from pictures like that. And what a case like this, where somebody is in a coma, is without consciousness, as a result of damage to the brain, is a stark illustration of the physical nature of mental life, the physical basis for everything that we normally hold dear, like free will, consciousness, morality, and emotions. And that's what we'll begin the course with, talking about how a physical thing can give rise to mental life. We'll talk a lot about children. This is actually a specific child. It's my son, Zachary, a younger son, dressed up as
Got a tank.
Spider-Man, but it is Halloween. No, it's not Halloween. Oh. No. There's more to say about that. I study child development for a living, and I'm interested in several questions. So one question is just the question of development. Everybody in this room can speak and understand English. Everybody in this room has some understanding of how the world works, how physical things behave. Everybody in this room has some understanding of other people and how people behave. And the question that preoccupies developmental psychologists is, how do we come to have this knowledge? And in particular, how much of it is hardwired, built in, innate, and how much of it is a product of culture, of language, of schooling? And
we just have to.
Psychologists use many ingenious methods to try to pull these apart.
We have to use our brains.
What are the basic components of human nature?
To visualize the Spider-Man, you got
There's
to
also the
think.
question of continuity. To what extent is Zachary at that age going to be that way forever?
I spider, therefore I man.
To what extent is your fate sealed? To what extent could, if I were to meet you when you were 5 years old, I could describe the way you are now? The poet William Wordsworth wrote, "The child is father to the man." And what this means is that you can see within every child the adult he or she will become. We will look and ask the question whether this is true. Is it true for your personality? Is it true for your interest? Is it true for your intelligence? Another question having to do with development is, what makes us the way we are?
I broke a
We're
rule.
different in a lot of ways.
I left one of my
People in
bases
this room
naked.
differ according to their taste in food. They differ according to their IQs, whether they're aggressive or shy.
But my opponent did as well.
Males, females, both or neither. Whether they're good at music, whether they're politically liberal or conservative. Why are we different? What's the explanation for why we're different? And again, this could be translated in terms of a question of genes and environment. To what extent are things the result of the genes we possess? To what extent are our individual natures the result of how we were raised? And to what extent are they best explained in terms of an interaction? One common theory, for instance, is that we are shaped by our parents. This was best summarized most famously by the British poet Philip Larkin, who wrote, they mess you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. Is he right? It's very controversial. It's been a series of a huge controversy in a popular culture to the extent to which parents matter. And this is an issue which will preoccupy us for much of the course. A different question: what makes somebody attractive? And this can be asked at all sorts of levels, but a simple level is, what makes for a pretty face? So these are, according to ratings, very attractive faces.
Oh, we can't see
They are
them.
not the faces of real people. What's on the screen are computer-generated faces of a Caucasian male and a Caucasian female who don't exist in the real world. But through using this sort of computer generation and then asking people what they think of this face, what they think of that face, scientists have come to some sense as to what really makes a face attractive, both within cultures and across cultures. And that's something which we're going to devote some time to when we talk about social behavior, and in particular when we talk about sex. Not all attractiveness, not all beauty, of course, is linked to sex. So pandas, for instance, like this panda, are notoriously cute. And I don't have anything to say about it, really. It's just a cute picture.
Okay.
Morality is extremely central to our lives. And a deep question which we will struggle with throughout most of the course is the question of good and evil, evil and good. These three pictures exemplify different sorts of evil, what you call institutional evil, by somebody behaving cruelly towards somebody else, perhaps not due to malice, but because of the situation that she's in. It has a picture of Osama bin Laden, a mass murderer driven by a political cause, And then there's this guy on the bottom. Anybody know who he is? Ted Bundy. Who got that? Film that, man. No. Ted Bundy. Exactly. And that's like, before we get into the technical stuff, it's like crazy evil. And we're going to have to come to terms with why some people are like that. And again, the same situation comes up. Is it part of your nature to be good or bad? Or is it largely due to the situation that you fall in? And there's a lot of some quite spectacular experiments that try to tease that apart. If we're going to talk about evil, we should also talk about good. These are pictures of two notoriously good men, Oskar Schindler and Paul Rusesabagina, each who at different times in history saved the lives of many, many people at great risk to themselves. Schindler in the Holocaust, and then the other guy because I can't pronounce his name, Rusesabagina, in Rwanda. And they both had real good movies made about them.
Oh, good.
And so, but
Most
what's
important
interesting
thing.
with these cases is you couldn't have predicted ahead of time that they would be heroes. And one personal issue within any of us is, what would we do in such situations? Finally, throughout this course, we will discuss mental illness. Now, towards the end of the class, I want to devote a full week to discussing major disorders like depression and anxiety, because of their profound social importance.
Oh, the end?
Such disorders are reasonably common in college students. Many people in this room are currently suffering from a mood disorder, an anxiety disorder, or both. And I won't ask for a show of hands, but I know a lot of people in this room are on some form of medication for this disorder. And we'll discuss the current research in why people get these disorders and what's the best way to make them better. But I also have a weakness for the less common mental disorders that I think tell us something really interesting about mental life. So when we talk about memory, for instance, we'll talk about disorders in memory, including some disorders that keep you from forming new memories, as well as disorders of amnesia, where you forget the past. And these are extraordinarily interesting for all sorts of reasons. Early in the course, in fact, I think next week, we will discuss, later on in the course, middle of the semester, we will discuss the amazing case of Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a construction worker about 100 years ago. Due to an explosion, a metal pipe went through his head like so. Miraculously, he was not killed. In fact, his friends, it went through his head, ended up 100 feet away, covered with brains and blood. And Phineas Gage sat down and go, oh. And then on the way to the hospital, they stopped by a pub. Have some cider.
He just sat down and whoa.
He was not blind, he was not deaf, he was not retarded. But something else happened to him. He lost his sense of right and wrong. He lost his control. He used to be a hard-working family man. After the accident, he lost all of that. He couldn't hold a job. He couldn't stay faithful to his wife. He couldn't speak for 5 minutes without cursing. He got into fights. He got into brawls. He got drunk. He lost his control. He ended up on a circus sideshow, traveling through the country with the big steel pipe that went through his head. And this is, again, an extraordinary example of how the brain can give rise to the mind and how things that go wrong with the brain can affect you in a serious way. We'll discuss cases of multiple personality disorder, where people have more than one personality, and also discuss the debate over whether such cases are true or not, whether they could be taken as a real phenomena or a made-up phenomena, there's a matter of a lot of controversy. And then we'll even discuss some rarer cases, like Capgras syndrome. Capgras syndrome is typically, there's hundreds of cases, not many, hundreds of cases. It's typically the result of some sort of stroke. And what happens to you is very specific. You develop a particular delusion, like it's getting dark. And the delusion is that the people you love the most have been replaced. They've been replaced by aliens or robots, thank you, by Martians, by CIA agents, by trained actors and actresses. But the idea is the people you care for the most, you believe are gone.
I don't know if I got this.
This could lead to tragic consequences. Capgras syndrome is associated with a very high level of violence. One man in Australia a couple of years ago was under the delusion that his father was replaced with a robot.
Yeah, I'm breaking the rules to get a rocket because I want to cover my HQ here.
The very same parts
oh
of
boy.
the brain is called Cotard's syndrome.
And look at how many turns it's going to take to get there.
You believe that you're dead. You believe that you're dead. You are persuaded that you're dead. You're walking around. You know you're walking around. You know that there are people around. But you think.
Okay, actually, it might be able to do some good if I park it in the city for a turn, but probably not.
Big screwy problems of messed up people. Rather, they're related at a pinpoint level to certain parts of your brain. And we're going to talk about the best modern theories as to why these syndromes occur. Now, the reason to be interested in them, again, is not because they're frequent. They aren't. And it's not because of some sort of gruesome, morbid curiosity. Rather, by looking at extreme cases, they can help us best understand normal life. Often by looking at extremes, it throws into sharp contrast things we naturally take for granted. The issue of psychopathy, of people who either due to brain damage or because they're born that way have no moral understanding, can help us cope with questions of free will and responsibility, of the relationship or difference between mental illness and evil. Multiple personality cases force us to address the question of what is a self. To what extent are all of us composed of multiple people? And to what extent are we a single unified person over time? Cases like Capgras are important because they tell us about how we see the world. They tell us, for instance, that there's a difference between recognizing something, in a sense that you could name it, and knowing what it is. And so by studying these abnormal cases, we can get some insight into regular life. So that's the end of the illustration of the example topics. The syllabus lists many more. I'll end by telling you that there's a lot of stuff that we'll be talking about, that I want to talk about, that I am not expert in. And fortunately, there is a community at Yale of the best scholars and teachers on the planet. And so it would be a shame for me not to use them to cover some of these issues. And so I'm going to include 4 guest lecturers. The first one is Dr. Marvin Shun, who teaches the Introduction to Psychology course in the fall and is my competition. And he's going to give an amazing lecture on cognitive neuroscience, especially the cognitive neuroscience of faces. Dr. Susan Nolan-Huxema is the world's authority on depression, and in particular on sex differences in depression. And she's going to talk about this towards the end of the course. Kelly Brownell is going to talk, is the head of the Rudd Center, focuses on obesity, eating disorders, dieting, and he'll talk about the psychology of food. And finally, Dr. Peter Salovey, Dean of Yale College, is going to come to us on Valentine's Day and tell us everything he knows about the mysteries of love.
Ooh.
All of these details are in the syllabus, and I'll stick around and answer questions. Hope to see you next week.
Yeah, that was, unfortunately, the introductory lectures of these things are always Typically, Jesus Christ, I'm getting my ass kicked. I'm not going to be any good at this, am I?
We're going to begin.
Wait, are we going to begin? I didn't know it was going to autoplay to number 2, but that's actually quite convenient and wonderful. So what did I do wrong? I did something wrong maybe 3 turns ago, and it had something to do with the part of the map that actually covers my HQ not being guarded from how many guys are closing in on it now. Sold for Rent is going to be able to give me some better pointers. But yeah, apologies for the intro lecture not being as interesting as what might end up coming later on. I'm kind of attacking his HQ right now as a diversionary ploy because I really want them off mine while my rocket moves into position. Yeah, syllabus week is lame. Syllabus week is not the good stuff. Oftentimes, lecture number 2 will blow your mind and make you want to listen through this thing immediately, and you'll have the most fun. You will have the amount of fun you usually have consuming fiction, but it'll be nonfiction. But that happens on lecture number 2 usually, is how these things go. So let's see what we got. And in the meanwhile, I am also interested. Feel free to backseat this game where I'm playing against a stranger. Since I'm not playing against a fan, it's I don't have to censor and redact the Georgia military news. Here we go.
We're going to begin the class proper, Introduction to Psychology, with a discussion about the brain. And in particular, I want to lead off the class with an idea that the Nobel Prize-winning biologist Francis Crick described as the astonishing hypothesis. And the astonishing hypothesis is summarized like this. As he writes, the astonishing hypothesis is that you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will, are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons.
More like nerds.
It is fair to describe this as astonishing. It is an odd and unnatural view. And I don't actually expect people to believe it at first. It's an open question whether you'll believe it when this class comes to an end. But I'd be surprised if many of you believe it now. Most people don't. Most people, in fact, hold a different view. Most people are dualists. Now, dualism is a very different doctrine. It's a doctrine that can be found in every religion and in most philosophical systems throughout history. It was very explicit in Plato, for instance. But the most articulate and well-known defender of dualism is the philosopher René Descartes. And René Descartes explicitly asked the question, are humans merely physical machines, merely physical things? And he answered no. He agreed that animals are machines. In fact, he called them beast machines and said animals, non-human animals, are merely robots. But people are different. There's a duality of people. Like animals, we possess physical, material bodies. But unlike animals, what we are is not physical. We are immaterial souls that possess physical bodies, that have physical bodies, that reside in physical bodies, that connect to physical bodies. So this is known as dualism because the claim is, for humans at least, there are 2 separate things. There's our material bodies and there's our immaterial minds. Now, Descartes made 2 arguments for dualism. One argument involved observations about human action. So Descartes lived in a fairly sophisticated time, and his time did have robots. These were not electrical robots, of course. They were robots powered by hydraulics. So Descartes would walk around the French royal gardens, and the French royal gardens were set up like a 17th century Disneyland. They had these characters that would operate according to water flow. And so if you stepped on a certain panel, a swordsman would jump out with a sword. If you stepped somewhere else, a bathing beauty would cover herself up behind some bushes. And Descartes said, boy, these machines respond in certain ways to certain actions. So machines can do certain things. In fact, he says, our bodies work that way too. If you tap somebody on the knee, your leg will jump out. Well, maybe that's all we are. But Descartes said that can't be, because there are things that humans do that no machine could ever do. Humans are not limited to reflexive action. Rather, humans are capable of coordinated, creative, spontaneous things. We can use language, for instance. And sometimes my use of language, it can be reflexive. Somebody says, how are you? And I say, I am fine, how are you? But sometimes I could say what I choose to be. How are you? Pretty damn good. I can just choose. And machines, Descartes argued, are incapable of that sort of choice. Hence, we are not mere machines.
Oh, come on. I didn't even see that tank there.
Is, of course, quite famous.
Should I just yield? Is this it?
This he came to using the method of...
Okay, I have an idea.
So he started asking himself the question, what can I be sure of? And he said, well, I believe there's a God, but honestly, I can't be sure there's a God. I believe I live in a rich country, but maybe I've been fooled. He even said, I believe I have had friends and family, but maybe I am being tricked. Maybe an evil demon, for instance, has tricked me, has deluded me into thinking I have experiences that aren't real. And of course, the modern version of this is the Matrix. The idea, the Matrix is explicitly built upon Cartesian Descartes' worries about an evil demon. Maybe everything you're now experiencing is not real, but rather is a product of some other, perhaps malevolent creature. Descartes similarly could doubt he has a body. In fact, he noticed that madmen sometimes believe they have extra limbs, or they believe they're of different sizes and shapes than they really are. And Descartes said, how do I know I'm not crazy? I mean, crazy people don't think they're crazy, so the fact I don't think I'm crazy doesn't mean I'm not crazy. How do I know, Descartes said, I'm not dreaming right now? But there is one thing, Descartes concluded, that he cannot doubt. And the answer is he cannot doubt that he is himself thinking. That would be self-refuting. And so Descartes used the method of doubt to say, there's something really different about having a body. That's always uncertain from having a mind. And he used this argument as a way to support dualism, as a way to support the idea that bodies and minds are separate. And so he concluded, I knew that I was a substance, the whole essence or nature of which is to think, and that for its existence there is no need of any place, nor does it depend on any material thing. That is to say, the soul by which I am, what I am, is entirely distinct from body. Now, I said before that this is common sense, and I want to illustrate the common sense nature of this in a few ways. One thing is, our dualism is enmeshed in our language. So we have a certain mode of talking about things that we own, or things that are close to us. My arm, my heart, my child, my car. But we also extend that to my body and my brain. We talk about owning our brains as if we're somehow separate from them. Our dualism shows up in intuitions about personal identity. And what this means is that common sense tells us that somebody can be the same person even if their body undergoes radical and profound changes. The best examples of this are fictional. So we have no problem understanding a movie where somebody goes to sleep as a teenager.
I'm going to
as Jennifer Garner.
use the bathroom real quick
Now
and basically let this defeat play out. I have a very fun idea for the next 30 seconds, though.
But at the same time,
A very fun
no
idea.
adult, no teenager, no child ever leaves and says, I'm totally conceptually confused. Rather, we follow the story. We can also follow stories which involve more profound transformations, as when a man dies and is reborn into the body of a child. Now, you might have different views people around this room will have different views as to whether reincarnation really exists. But we can imagine it. We can imagine a person dying and then re-emerging in another body. This is not Hollywood invention. One of the great short stories of the last century begins with the sentence by Franz Kafka. As Gregor Samsa woke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. And again, Kafka invites us to imagine waking up into a body of a cockroach. And we can. This is also not modern. Hundreds of years before the birth of Christ,
let's resign.
Described the fate of the companions of Odysseus, who were transformed by a witch into pigs. Actually, that's not quite right. She didn't turn the men into pigs. She did something worse. She stuck them into bodies of pigs. They had the head and voice and bristles and body of swine, but their minds remained unchanged as before. So they were penned there weeping. And we are invited to imagine the fate of, again, finding ourselves in the bodies of other creatures. And if you can imagine this, this is because you are imagining what you are as separate from the body that you reside in. We allow for the notion that many people can occupy one body. This is a mainstay of some slapstick humor, including the classic movie All of Me, Steve Martin, Lily Tomlin, highly recommended. But many people think this sort of thing really happens. One analysis of multiple personality disorder is that you have many people inside a single body fighting it out for control.
All right, get ready.
We'll discuss multiple personality disorder towards the end of the semester, and it turns out
I don't recognize any of these COs. Okay, this is like the one in one of these games that I have played, but what's
you could have more than
ability?
one person
I don't remember it being particularly
This shows up in
good.
a different context involving exorcisms, where many belief systems allow for the idea that people's behavior, particularly their evil or irrational behavior, could be because something else has taken over their bodies. Finally,
Paul Bloom is the
most
speaker.
people around the world, all religions, and most people in most countries at most times believe that people can survive the destruction of their bodies. Now, cultures differ according to the fate of the body. Some cultures have the body going to the fate of the soul. Some cultures have you going to heaven or descending to hell. Others have you occupy another body. Still others have you occupy an amorphous spirit world. But what they share is the idea that what you are is separable from this physical thing you carry around. And the physical thing that you carry around can be destroyed.
Oh, what is this? A submarine thing?
Live on.
What is that thing?
These views
There's
are
our
particularly
base.
common
There's their
in the
base.
United States.
Where's our HQ?
In one survey done in Chicago a few years
Where's
ago,
the HQ?
people were asked their religion, and then were asked what would happen to them when they died.
Is there no
Most people in the sample
no
were
HQ?
Christian, and about 96% of Christians said, when I die, I'm going to go to heaven. Some of the sample was Jewish. Now, Judaism is actually a religion with a less than clear story about the afterlife. Still, most of the subjects who identify themselves as Jewish said when they die, they will go to heaven. Some of the sample denied having any religion at all, said they have no religion at all. Still, when these people were asked what would happen when they would die, most of them answered, I'm going to go to heaven. So, dualism is a mesh. A lot rests on it. But as Crick points out, the scientific consensus now is that dualism is wrong. There is no you separable or separate from your body. In particular, there's no you separable from your brain. To put it the way cognitive scientists and psychologists and neuroscientists like
I am definitely not winning. I am brand new at
the
this.
mind is what the brain
What
does.
is this? What unit am I looking
The
at?
mind reflects the workings of the
What
brain.
it's like a
just
submarine with a
computation
screw on
reflects
it?
the working of a computer.
What is
Now, why would you hold such an outrageous view? Why would you reject dualism in favor of this alternative? Well, a few reasons. One reason is dualism has always had its problems. For one thing, it's a profoundly unscientific doctrine.
Also, I thought of a fun idea. Oh wait, no, look at this. What am I doing? I'm dual wielding.
Attractive or unattractive? What's the basis for mental
let's just
illness? And
scroll that
dualism
one to the
simply
left.
says
Yeah,
it's
okay.
physical, it's part of the ether.
Whose turn
and
is
hence
it?
fails to
When
explain
and
it.
where?
More specifically, dualists like Descartes struggle to explain how a physical body connects to an immaterial soul. What's the conduit? How could this connection be made? After all, Descartes knew full well that
is it a troop carrier? How can I get like a little guide of what kind of unit I'm looking at?
If you bang your toe, stub your toe, you feel pain.
How come he has 3 units and I have 2? Oh, because of this right here.
But he could only wave his hands as to how this physical thing in the world could connect to an immaterial mind. Descartes, when he was alive, was reasonable enough concluding that physical objects cannot do certain things. He was reasonable enough in concluding, for instance, as he did, that there's no way a merely physical object could ever play a game of chess. Because such a capacity is beyond the capacity of the physical world, and hence you have to extend exponentially.
There's sheer rejection of meta and the double recon opening. It was an opening. I was spooking them based on their reaction, on how I was reacting to the unit composition I was seeing on the map. Eddie, you're bumping into my headphone cable.
We know machines can manipulate symbols.
I
We know
respect the
machines
sheer
have limited
rejection of the meta and
capacities
the double
to
recon opening.
engage in mathematical and logical reasoning, to recognize things.
I don't really know how to play as flak very well either. I don't know what unit I'm looking at with this submarine that has a screw on it thing.
So you can no longer say, look, physical things just can't do that, because we know physical things can do a lot. And this opens up the possibility that humans are physical things. In particular, that humans are brains.
You know what? I'll just send it into enemy territory and attack the other one with it and see what it does experientially. I'll learn through failure.
In mental life. Somebody who held a dualist view that said that what we do and what we decide and what we think and what we want have nothing to do with the physical world would be embarrassed by the fact that the brain seems to correspond in intricate and elaborate ways to our mental life. Now, this has been known for a long time. Philosophers and psychologists knew for a long time that getting smacked in the head could change your mental faculties, that diseases like syphilis could make you deranged, that chemicals like caffeine and alcohol can affect how you think. But what's new is we can now, in different ways, see the direct effects of mental life. Somebody with a severe and profound
Black boat, is that what it is?
The deficit will be shown correspondingly in her brain. Studies using imaging techniques like CAT scans, PET, and fMRI illustrate that different parts of the brain are active during different parts of mental life. For instance, the difference between seeing words, hearing words, reading words, and generating words can correspond to different aspects of what part of your brain is active. To some
Interesting
extent,
how
if
we're
we
like
put
kind of
you in an
split
fMRI scanner
between
and observe what you're
top
doing
and bottom
in
from the
real time,
beginning.
by looking at the activity
Infantry
patterns
only
in your
water
brain,
transport. Okay, good to know.
we
Good to
can
know
tell
now.
whether
Now I can
you're
decipher
thinking about music
the map a
or
little more
thinking
clearer.
about sex. To some extent, we can tell whether you're solving a moral dilemma versus something else. And this is no surprise if what we are is the workings of our physical brains. But it is extremely difficult to explain if one is a dualist. Now, so what you have is the scientific consensus is that all of mental life, including consciousness and emotions and choice and morality, are the products of brain activities. So you would expect that when you rip open the skull and look at the brain, you'd see something glorious. You'd see, like, I don't know, a big shiny thing with glass tubes and blinding lights and sparks and wonderful colors. And actually, though, the brain is just disgusting. It looks like an old meatloaf. It's gray when you take it out of the head. It's called gray matter. But that's just because it's out of the head. Inside the head is bright red because it's pulsing with blood. It doesn't even taste good. Well, has anybody here ever eaten brain? I mean, it's good with cream sauce, but everything's good with cream sauce. So So the question is, how can something like this give rise to us? And I mean, you have to have some sympathy for Descartes. There's another argument Descartes could have made that's a lot less subtle than the ones he did make, which is that thing responsible for free will and love and consciousness, ridiculous. What I want to do, and what the goal of neuroscience is
the black boat going to be useful in this map where the water's so shallow, though?
How the brain works, how the brain can give rise to thought. And what
Also, where is the HQ? I don't think I ever figured that out.
But it's something we'll continue.
I'm having a hard time
throughout the course
picturing where I should move my soldiers long term.
What I want to
7
do
movements, so
now is
yes.
provide a
Oh,
big picture.
okay. It'll give them a boost.
With the smallest
Yeah, I
interesting
see.
part of the brain, and then get bigger and bigger and bigger. Talk about how the small part of the brain, the neurons, the basic building blocks of thought, combine to other mental structures, and then to different subparts of the brain, and finally to the whole thing.
Okay, so this is going to be like an infantry-only battle, am I interpreting that right?
One of the discoveries of psychology
Tanks won't be able to go anywhere with this river in the way, will they? Maybe they can go on the edge of the map this way? I don't know if I want to risk it and spend the money and test. Oh, there's a port right there I can capture. Yeah, let's go ahead and build a tank.
Look quite different from one another, but this is a typical one.
I wish I could see the neuron.
These little tentacles here. And the dendrites get signals from other neurons. Now these signals can be either excitatory.
Labs are the HQs. Which one is the lab? Lab. Is it the rocket? Hey, there's an airport? And the enemy already has it? What?
The excitatory signals are pluses, the inhibitory ones are minuses, and then if you get a certain number, plus 60 or something, the neuron will fire. And it fires along the axon, the thing to the right. The axon is much longer than the dendrites. And in fact, some axons are many feet long. There's an axon leading from your spinal cord to your big toe.
Wait, does no one have the airport? It's like kind of orange colored.
Let's go out. Surrounding, to complete a mechanical metaphor that would have led Descartes to despair. Thank you, Colleen. Surrounding the axon is a myelin sheath, which is actually just insulation. It helps the firing work quicker. So here are some facts about neurons. There are a lot of them, about 1,000 billion of them, and each neuron can be connected to around thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, other neurons. So it's an extraordinarily complicated computing device. Neurons come in 3 forms.
Hey!
There are sensory neurons, which take information from the world. So as you see,
I actually won.
there are neurons firing from your retina, sending signals to your brain. There are motor neurons. If you decide to raise your hand, those are motor neurons telling the muscles what to do. And there are interneurons, which connect the two. And basically, the interneurons do the thinking. They make the connection between sensation and action. It used to be believed, and it's the sort of thing when I taught this course many years ago, I would lecture on, that neurons do not grow back once you lose them. You never get them back. This is actually not true. There are parts of the brain in which neurons can regrow. One interesting...
I'm getting more movement on the rivers than I was originally expecting.
It either fires or it doesn't. It's all or nothing. If you squeeze the trigger of a gun really hard and really fast, it doesn't fire any faster or harder.
Oh, we both have airports? I guess mine's the top one. The distribution is so all over the place.
All or nothing when sensation is very graded. If somebody next to you pushed on your hand, the degree of pushing, you'd be able to notice it. It's not either pushing or not pushing. You can degrees of pushing, degrees of heat, degrees of brightness. And the answer is, although neurons are all or nothing, there are ways to code intensity. So one simple way to code intensity is the number of neurons firing. The more neurons, the more intent. Another way to increase intensity is the frequency of firing. So I'll just use those two. The first one is the number of neurons firing. The second one is the frequency of firing. In that something is more intense if it's bang, 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 than bang, bang, bang. And these are two ways through which neurons encode intensity. Now, neurons are connected, and they talk to one another. And it used to be thought they were tied to one another, like a computer. Like you take wires and you connect wires to each other. You wrap them around and connect them. It turns out this isn't the case. It turns out that neurons relate to one another chemically in a kind of interesting way. Between any neurons, between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another, there's a tiny gap. The gap could be about...
All right, we just drew first blood. We got the first kill of the match. Let's see if I can snowball that into something.
And this gap is known as a synapse. And what happens is, when a neuron fires, an axon sends chemicals shooting through the gap. These chemicals are known as neurotransmitters, and they affect the dendrites. So neurons communicate to one another chemically. These, again, the chemicals could excite the other neuron, excitatory, bring up the chances it will fire, or inhibit the other neuron, inhibitory. Now, neurotransmitters become interesting because a lot of psychopharmacology, both of the medical sort and the recreational sort, consists of fiddling with neurotransmitters. And so you could see this through some examples. There are two sorts of ways you could fiddle with neurotransmitters, and correspondingly, two sorts of drugs. There are agonists, and what an agonist does is increases the effect of neurotransmitters, either by making more neurotransmitters, or stopping the cleanup of neurotransmitters, or in some cases by faking a neurotransmitter, by mimicking its effects. Then there are antagonists that slow down the amount of neurotransmitters. Either
antagonists?
They destroy neurotransmitters, or they make it hard to create more, or in some cases they go to the dendrite of the neuron and they kind of put a paste over it so that the neurotransmitters can't connect. And it's through these clever ways that neurons can affect your mental life. So for instance, there is a drug known as curare. And curare is an antagonist. It's a very particular sort of antagonist. It blocks motor neurons from affecting muscle fibers. What this does then is it paralyzes you, because your motor neurons, you send a command to your arm to lift up, it doesn't work. You send a command to your leg to
we
move,
definitely didn't get
work.
the first kill in the
motor
chess
neurons
match.
Are deactivated. And then, because the way you breathe is through motor neurons, you then die. There's alcohol. Alcohol is inhibitory. Now, this may be puzzling to people. It's mildly paradoxical, because you may be thinking, alcohol is not inhibitory. On the contrary, when I drink a lot of alcohol, I lose my inhibitions and become a more fun person. I become more aggressive and more sexually vibrant and simply more beautiful. And so, in what way is alcohol inhibitory? Well, the answer is it inhibits the inhibitory parts of your brain. So you have parts of your brain that are basically telling you now, largely in the frontal lobes, sort of, okay, keep your pants on, don't hit anybody, don't use bad words. Alcohol relaxes, shuts down those parts of the brain. If you take enough alcohol, it then goes down to inhibit the excitatory parts of your brain, and then you fall on the floor and pass out. Amphetamines increase the amount of arousal. In particular, they increase the amount of norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter that's responsible for just general arousal. And so amphetamines include drugs like speed and coke. There are Prozac works on serotonin. When we discuss clinical psychology and depression, we'll learn the extent to which neurotransmitter disorders are implicated in certain disorders like depression. And one problem is that for depression is that there's too little of a neurotransmitter known as serotonin. Prozac makes serotonin more prevalent, and so in some extent might help alleviate depression. Parkinson's disease is a disease involving destruction of motor control and loss of motor control, difficulty moving.
That was a very strong hit.
And one factor in Parkinson's is too little of a neurotransmitter known as dopamine. The drug L-Dopa increases the supply of dopamine, and so does something to alleviate, at least temporarily, the symptoms of Parkinson's. So you have neurons, and they're clustered together, and they fire and they communicate to one another. So how does this all work to give rise to creatures who could do interesting things like talk and think? Well, again, it used to be believed that the brain is wired up like a computer, like a PC or a Mac or something like that. But we know this can't be true. It can't be true because there's two ways in which the brain is better than a computer. For one thing, the brain is highly resistant to damage. If you have a laptop, and I persuade you to open it up for me, and I take the pliers and kind of snip just about anywhere, your laptop will be destroyed. But the brain is actually more resilient. You can take a lot of brain damage and still preserve some mental functioning. To some interesting sense, there's some sort of damage resistance built into the brain that allows different parts of the brain to take over if some parts are damaged. A second consideration is the brain is extremely fast. Your computer works on wires and electricity, but your brain uses tissue, and tissue is extremely slow. The paradox then is, how do you create such a fast computer with such slow stuff? And you can't, if the brain was wired up like a personal computer, it would take you 4 hours to recognize a face. But in fact, we could do things extremely quickly. So the question then is, how is the brain wired up? And the answer is, unlike commercially generated computers, the brain works through parallel processing, massively parallel distributed processing. There's a whole lot of research, and this is research, some of which takes place outside psychology departments and in engineering departments and computer science departments, trying to figure out how a computer can do the same things brains can do. And one way people do this is they take a hint from nature and they try to construct massively distributed networks to do aspects of reasoning. So there's a very simple computational network that is interesting because it kind of looks to some extent like the way neurons look, and this is often known as neural networks. And people who study this often claim to be studying neural network modeling, to try to build smart machines by modeling them after brains. And in the last 20 years or so, this has been a huge and vibrant area of study, where people are trying to wire up machines that can do brain-like things from components that look a lot like neurons and are wired up together as neurons are. One consideration in all of this is that this is a very young field and nobody knows how to do it yet. There is no machine yet that can recognize faces or understand sentences at the level of a 2-year-old human. There is no machine yet that can do just about anything people can do in an interesting way. And this is in part because the human brain is wired up in an extraordinarily more complicated way.
How do I get to the rockets?
Any sort of simple neural network. This is a sort of schematic diagram. You're not responsible for this.
How do I get to the rockets?
Of parts of the visual cortex. And the thing to realize about this is it's extraordinarily simplified. So the brain is a complicated
Yeah, the lectures are almost 20 years old.
So we've talked a little bit about the basic building blocks of the brain.
Apologies for some outdated terminology.
We've then talked about how neurons can communicate to one another, then turned to how neurons are wired up together. Now let's talk a little bit about different parts of the brain. Now, there's some things you don't actually need your brain to do. The study of what you don't need your brain to do has often drawn upon this weird methodology where this was actually done in France a lot, where they would decapitate people. And after decapitating people, psychologists would rush to the body of the headless person and just test out reflexes and stuff like that. It's kind of gruesome. But we know there are some things you don't need your brain for. You don't need your brain for newborn sucking, limb flexation and withdrawal from pain. Your limb will pull back even if your head is gone. Erection of the penis can be done without a brain. Vomiting, also done without a brain. Here, I need a volunteer. Very simple. This will not involve any of the above. Could you stand up? Just, okay. This is a new shirt, so I want to stay away. No, this is, if you hold out your hand, and one hand flat, excellent, excellent. That's the textbook, 5th edition. Now, perfect. What you'll notice is, thank you very much. What you'll notice is this hit and this hand went back up. This is something automatic, instinctive, and does not require your brain. So your brain isn't needed for everything. What does your brain do? Well, some things that your brain does involve very low-level internal structures. And these are called subcortical structures because they're below the cortex. They're underneath the cortex. So for instance, what we have here is a diagram of the brain. The way to read this diagram is, it's as if it were my brain. I'm facing this way. My head gets cut in half down here. And then you can see the brain. So this is the front over here. That's the back. Some key parts are illustrated here. The medulla, for instance, is responsible for heart rate and respiration. It's very deep within the brain, and if it gets damaged, you're likely to die. The cerebellum is responsible for body balance and muscular coordination. And to give you, again, a feeling for the complexity of these systems, the cerebellum contains approximately 30 billion neurons. The hypothalamus is responsible here for feeding, hunger, thirst, and to some extent, sleep. And here's the same brain parts in close-up. Now, all of these parts of the brains are essential, and many of them are implicated in interesting psychological processes, but where the action is the cortex. Isn't this beautiful?
I know. How am I actually winning this?
And the outer layer is all crumpled up. You ever wonder why your brain looks wrinkled? That's because it's all crumpled. If you took out somebody's cortex and flattened it out, it would be about 2 feet square.
I think I haven't been spending enough attention to the chess, though. It's definitely looking like I'm not going to win that one.
Is where all the neat stuff takes place. Fish don't have any of it, so no offense to fish, but I think that's fish don't have much of a mental life. Reptiles and birds have a little bit of it, and primates have a lot, and humans have a real lot.
Is this what the Crash Bandicoot villain is all about?
Is cortex. And the cortex can be broken up into different parts, or lobes. There is and again, this is facing in profile forward. There is the frontal lobe, easy to remember, it's part in front. The parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. And one theme we're going to return to is, this is half the brain. This is, in fact, the left half of the brain. On the other half, the right half, everything's duplicated with some slight and subtle differences. What's really weird, one really weird finding about these lobes is that they include topological maps.
That's what's happening, Ashinko.
Here's a cartoon which actually illustrates a classic experiment.
All right, we're going to trap their black
by
boat.
some physiologists who, for some reason, had a dog's brain opened up and started shocking different parts of the brain. You can do brain surgery while fully conscious because the brain itself has sense organs to it.
How did people figure out that
the dog, when they zap part of its brain, its leg would kick up. And it took Dr. Penfield at McGill University to do the same thing with people. So they were doing some brain surgery.
Oh, are the labs the satellite dishes?
I don't know how we got to do
Is that what that is?
He started zapping it, and boom, the person's parts of their body would move. More than that, when he zapped other parts of the brain, people would claim to see colors. And he zapped other parts of the brain, people would claim to hear sounds. And other parts of the brain, people would claim to experience touch. And through his research and other research, it was found that there are maps in the brain of the body. There is a map in the motor part of the brain, the motor cortex, of the sort up on the left, and the sensory cortex of the sort that you could see on the right. And you could tell what's what by opening up the brain and shocking different parts, and those parts will correspond to the parts of the body shown in the diagram there.
Okay, I see. Thank you for the tips.
These maps. The first is they're topographical. And what this means is that if two parts are close together on the body, they'll be close together on the brain. So your tongue is closer to your jaw than it is to your hip.
Eddie, are you okay?
The body. So too,
what's the matter, boy?
In both the motor cortex and the somatic.
For some reason, he decided to just thump his abdomen into the desk. I think he tried to jump up on the bed and made a slip.
Correspond to the size of the body part in the real world. Rather,
he didn't yelp or anything. He's probably fine.
Is the extent to which either they have motor command over it or sensory control. So there's a whole lot of sensory organs, for instance, focused along your tongue, and that's why that's so big. An enormous amount on your face, but your shoulder doesn't even make it on there, because although your shoulder might be bigger than your tongue, there's not much going on. In fact, if you draw a diagram of a person, what their body is corresponding to the amount of somatosensory cortex, you get something like that. That's your sensory body. Now, so you have these maps in your head. But the thing to realize is, and these maps are part of your cortex, but the things to realize is that's an important part of what goes on in your brain. But less than 1/4 of the cortex contains these maps, or projection areas. The rest is involved in language and reasoning and moral thought and so on. And in fact, the proportion, as you go from rat, cat, monkey, humans, less and less of it is devoted to projection areas and more to other things. So how do we figure out what the other parts of the brain do? Well, there's all sorts of methods. Typically, these are recent imaging methods like CAT scan and PET scan and fMRI, which, as I said before, show parts of your brain at work. If you want to know which part of your brain is responsible for...
I think Trig is also talking about the Total Recall machine from Total Recall.
You could put somebody into a scanner and have them exposed to language...
Where you like feel like you went on a vacation or a cool spy adventure.
Another way to explore what the brain does is to consider what happens to people when very bad things happen to their brain. And these bad things could happen through lesions, through tumors, through strokes, through injury. For the most part, neuropsychologists don't like helmet laws. Neuropsychologists love when motorcyclists drive without helmets, because through their horrible accidents, we gain great insights into how the brain works. And the logic is, if you find somebody, crudely, if you find somebody with damage to this part of the brain, right here, and that person can't recognize faces, for instance, there's some reason to believe that this part of the brain is related to face recognition. And so through the study of brain damage and the study of we can gain some understanding of what different parts of the brain do. And so people study brain damage that implicates motor control, such as apraxia. And what's interesting about apraxia is it's not paralysis. Somebody with apraxia can do simple movements just fine, but they can't coordinate their movements. They can't do something like wave goodbye or light a cigarette. There's agnosia. And agnosia is a disorder which isn't blindness, because the person could still see perfectly well. Their eyes are intact. But rather, what happens in agnosia is they lose the ability to recognize certain things. Sometimes this is described as psychic blindness. And so they may get visual agnosia and lose the ability to recognize objects. They may get prosopagnosia and lose the ability to recognize faces. There are disorders of sensory neglect, some famous disorders. Again, it's not paralysis, it's not blindness, but due to certain parts of damaged parts of your brain, you might lose, for instance, the idea that there's a left side of your body.
I completely forgot about chess again. I'm not completely, I just have been unfortunately neglecting it.
The next few weeks to discussing them. There are disorders of language, like aphasia. The classic case was discovered by Paul Broca in 1861, a patient who had damage to part of his brain and can only say one word, tan. And the person would say, tan, 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 tan. And everything else was gone. There's other disorders of language, such as receptive aphasia, where the person could speak very fluently, but the words don't make any sense, and they can't understand anybody else. Other disorders that we'll discuss later on include acquired psychopathy, where damage to parts of your brain, particularly related to the frontal lobes, rob...
What? I misread the thing. I thought we were going to do at least 40% damage to the copter.
We're talking about neurons, connections between neurons, how neurons are wired up, the parts of the brain, what the different parts do. I want to end by talking about the two halves of the brain. And ask the question, how many minds do you have? Now, if you look at the brain, if you took the brain out and held it up, it would look pretty symmetrical. But it actually is not. There are actual differences between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. How many people here are right-handed? How many people here are left-handed? How many people here are sort of complicated? Ambidextrous, don't know, bit of the right, bit of left. People. Those of you who are right-handed, which comprises about 9 out of 10 people, have language in your left hemisphere. And in fact, we're going to be talking about right-handed people, for the most part, making generalizations in what I'll talk about now. Those of you who are left-handed are more complicated. Some of you have language in your right hemisphere, some in your left hemisphere.
That's right.
Where it's complicated. Now, the idea is that some things are duplicated. So if you were to lose half your brain, the other half can actually do a lot. But some things are more prevalent and more powerful.
Okay, those were tanks.
Than the other. And I want to show
We
you
got
a
two
brief
tanks
film clip
closing
from
on one of
Scientific
these.
American that illustrates the differences between the hemispheres.
I was winning a few
Before
turns
doing that,
ago.
I want
What
to provide
the
some introductory
hell's
facts.
happening?
Some
Why do I have an
things are
APC?
lateral,
I don't
typically
remember.
language
Oh,
in
that's
the
not
left.
my
Again,
APC.
This
That's
is a
why.
right-handed centric.
Is that
thing.
what base
But if you're
blocking,
right-handed,
base
language on the
locking
left, math and music on the
is?
right.
Oh, I'll get it eventually.
Crossover. And this is important when we think about the studies that will follow. But the crossover is that everything you see in the left visual field goes to the right side of your brain. Everything in the right visual field goes to the left side of the brain. And similarly, there's a crossover in action. So your right hemisphere controls the left side of the body, your left hemisphere controls the right side of the body. Now, finally, the two halves are connected. They're connected by this huge web called the corpus callosum. And I'm just going to skip this because the movie illustration will go through some of this. This illustrates certain themes that are
What was
discussed in
it?
detail
We didn't get to see it. What was it?
concerning the lateralization of different parts of different mental capacities, some in the left hemisphere, some in the right hemisphere. But it also serves as a useful methodological development, which is a nice illustration as to how looking at
I thought I
people
built
who
an
are
AAO and I guess it got
unusual,
blown up by tanks.
such as this man who had his brain bisected.
Well, I
his
guess we
left
gotta
hemisphere and his
head
right
out of there.
hemisphere
It's a lost
don't communicate
cause.
one another. How looking at such people, such extreme cases, can provide us with some understanding of how we normally do things. And this, again, is a theme we'll return to throughout the course. This is generally the general introduction of the brain that I wanted to provide, giving the framework for what I'll be talking about later on throughout the course, so that I might later on make reference to neurons or neurotransmitters or the cortex or the left hemisphere, and you'll sort of have the background to understand what I'm talking about. But I want to end this first real class with
Kind of at a loss now, a literal.
as to what
Whatever
psychologists know and don't
momentum
know.
I had
So
in
the
the early
idea
match is
behind a
gone
lot of
now.
Psychology, particularly a lot of neuroscience and cognitive.
Where are their
psychology,
bases?
is
I've
to
not
treat
been
the
able to
mind as an
decipher this
information
map. This
processor,
map is
as an
screwing
elaborate
me up.
computer. And so we
To
study
not
different problems like
Advance Wars 1 or 2
recognizing
for
faces
me.
or
The DS
language,
game
motor
stuff I'm
control,
completely
or
unfamiliar
logic.
with.
The strategy then often is to figure out what sort of program can solve these problems. And then we go on to ask, how could this program be instantiated in a physical brain?
I can't
So we
counter
would
the
solve,
copters
we would
in
study
any
people
way.
much as we'd study a computer from an alien planet.
And the black boat was
And I
kind of
think
useless.
this strategy is one
Or
I'm very
not, maybe. I
enthusiastic
need to pay attention to chess.
But there still remains what's sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. And this involves subjective experience. What's it like? So my computer can play chess. My computer can recognize numbers. It can do math. And maybe it does it kind of the same way that I do it. But my computer doesn't have feelings in the same sense. These are two classic illustrations. This is from a very old Star Trek episode. It illustrates angst. I think his starship's about to go into the sun or something. And that's my older kid, Max, who's happy. And so the question is, how does a thing like that give rise to consciousness?
Man, I don't know. I don't know what to do.
And this is a deep puzzle. And although some psychologists and philosophers think they've solved it, most of us are a lot more skeptical. Most of us think we have so far to go before we can answer questions like Huxley's question. Huxley points out how it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as a result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the Djinn, of the genie, when Aladdin rubbed
The
it.
Djinn?
It seems like magic that a fleshy lump of gray, disgusting meat can give rise to these feelings. The second bit of humility, what I'll end the class on, is I am presenting here, and I'll be presenting throughout this semester, what you can call a mechanistic conception of mental life.
I don't think I have much of a choice but to do that.
Bad
Bad attack. The numbers are not turning out what I keep predicting. 9 to 5. I thought I was going to get like
of ourselves.
6 to 4. I thought I was going to do more than 1 point of damage. I thought it said 40 something.
And so on. Now,
Okay, this guy can't move anywhere because of the
this sort of
artillery.
project in the end to be repellent. You might worry about how this meshes with humanist values. For instance, when we deal with one another in a legal and a moral setting, we think in terms
What?
of free will and responsibility.
6 to 3.
If you
Did I
get it
misinterpret
right,
that number?
You chose to do that.
I think I
it
just
reflects badly
what I
on you. If you save a life at risk to your own, great, you did something wonderful. It might be hard to mesh this with a conception in which all actions are the result of neurochemical physical processes. It might also be hard to mesh notions such as the purported intrinsic value of people. And finally, it might be hard to mesh the mechanistic notion of the mind with the idea that people have spiritual value. Faced with this tension, there are three possibilities. You might choose to reject the scientific conception of the mind. Many people do. You may choose to embrace dualism, reject the idea that the brain is responsible for mental life, and reject the promise of a scientific psychology. Alternatively, you might choose
playing
to
a
embrace
high
the
attack,
scientific
low
worldview
defense.
and reject all these
How am I
humanist
supposed to
values.
learn
And there
this
are some
stuff
philosophers and
fast enough to
psychologists
catch up?
Who do just that. Who claim that
Units gain
free
plus
will
30
and
attack, but
responsibility
lose
and
minus
spiritual value
20.
and intrinsic value are all illusions.
Oh, their power is activated. I didn't notice.
In modern science. Or you could try to reconcile them.
Oh, okay. One of them just died
to match
never mind, one of mine
scientific
just died.
mind with these humanist values you might want to preserve. And this is an issue which we're going to return to throughout the course.
I don't see
See you on
why
Wednesday.
they did that. Why did they do that? Why did my chess opponent do that? Did they just want to give me a freebie or something?
Last class we talked about the brain. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some foundations. So today and Monday, we're going to talk about two very big ideas. And these ideas are associated with Sigmund Freud and B.F. Skinner. And
Oh, here we go. It's the fun stuff
and
now.
behaviorism. And I want to talk about psychoanalysis today and behaviorism next week. Now, one of the things that makes these theories so interesting is their scope. Most of the work we're going to talk about in this class, most of the ideas are narrow. So we're going to talk about somebody's idea about racial prejudice. But that's not a theory of language acquisition. We'll talk about theories of schizophrenia, but they're not explanations of sexual attractiveness. Most theories are specialized theories. But these two views are grand theories. They're theories of everything, encompassing just about everything that matters. Day-to-day life, child development, mental illness, religion, war, love. Freud and Skinner had explanations of all of these. Now, this is not a history course. I have zero interest in describing historical figures in psychology just for the sake of telling you about the history of the field. What I want to tell you about, though, is I want to talk about these ideas because so much rests on them.
What is that?
And even more importantly, a lot of these ideas have critical influence on how we think about the present.
Everyone in the Northwest is just screwed.
Now, for better or worse, we live in a world profoundly affected
Oh,
by
that was a city it moved off of. I didn't notice.
Choose a name a famous psychologist. The answer, most of you, would be Freud. He's the most famous psychologist ever, and he's had a profound influence on the 20th and 21st century. Some biographical information.
Yes, please. I do want advice. I need to use whatever I can
in,
get.
Vienna, Austria.
I really don't know what I'm
but
doing
he
with
died
advanced
in
source by
London.
web. I
He
absolutely
escaped
don't
to
know what I'm
London
doing.
Soon after retreating there.
This is
at
brand
the
new to
beginning of
me.
World War
It's
II, as the Nazis began to occupy where he lived. He's one of the most famous scholars ever.
Distressingly
But he's not known
unfamiliar.
for any single discovery. Instead, he's known for the development of an encompassing theory of mind, one that he developed over the span of many decades. He was, in his time, extremely well known.
Playing meme characters and you got unlucky on those attacks.
And
Note
throughout
that
his
tank
life, he
versus
was a man
copter
of
is usually a good
extraordinary
idea.
energy and productivity.
Not the tank versus copter. Yeah, it was a
in part
last
because he was a
resort.
very
I'm not.
serious cocaine addict, but also just in general, he was just a high energy sort of person. He was up for the Nobel Prize in medicine and in literature, didn't get either one of them, didn't get the prize in medicine because Albert Einstein, everybody loves Albert Einstein. Well, Albert Einstein really wrote a letter, because they asked for opinions of other Nobel Prize, wrote a letter saying, don't give the prize to Freud. He doesn't deserve a Nobel Prize, he's just a psychologist. Oh, yeah. Okay. While he's almost universally acclaimed as a profoundly important intellectual figure, he's also the object of considerable dislike. This is in part because of his character. He was not a very nice man in many ways. He was deeply ambitious to the cause of promoting psychoanalysis, to the cause of presenting his view and defending it. And he was
Oh, I forgot about my
often
airport.
dishonest, extremely brutal to his friends,
To focus on the
terrible to his
lower
enemies.
right area.
He was an interesting character.
Okay.
My favorite Freud story was as he was leaving Europe.
Oh, what's my
during the rise of the
superpowers? I kind of
Nazis,
forgot about those.
as he was ready to go to England from, I think, either Germany or Austria, he had to sign a letter from the Gestapo. Gestapo agents intercepted him and demanded he sign a letter saying that at no point had he been threatened or harassed by the Gestapo. So he signs the letter, and then he writes underneath it, the Gestapo
Try to
is not
capture the
harming me in
comm
any way.
towers at
In
least.
fact, I highly recommend the
Protect
Gestapo
your
there.
mech. This guy?
he had a certain aggression to
Or
him.
this guy.
He's also disliked.
Okay, Calm
often
Tower. This
hated
is probably the one
because
you're
of his
talking
views.
about.
He was seen as a sexual renegade, out to destroy the conception of people as good and rational and pure beings. And when the Nazis rose to power in the 1930s, he was identified as a Jew who was devoted to destroying the most sacred notions of Christianity. And to some extent, many people see him this way, and to some extent, this accusation has some truth to it. Freud made claims about people that many of us, maybe most of us, would rather not know. Well, okay, what did he say? Well, if you ask somebody who doesn't like Freud what he said, they'll describe some of the stupider things he said. And in fact, Freud said a lot of things, some of which were not very rational. For instance, he's well known for his account of phallic symbols, arguing certain
this is already a good game unless they
monuments
zap their
are
own brain by accident.
subconsciously developed as penile representations. And related to this, he developed the notorious theory of penis envy. And penis envy is an account of a developmental state that every one of you who is female has gone through, according to Freud. And the idea is that you discovered at some point in your development that you lacked a penis.
The penis.
This
It's not like a penis.
And so each of you
It's always the penis,
at that
the
point,
child,
you've been castrated.
in these
You had
psychology
once,
lectures.
had a
Kind of like the orange from Metal Gear Solid 2.
penis, but somebody had taken it from you.
Wait, can I?
You had once had a penis at that point that you had been castrated. And so each of you inferred penis at that point taken it from you, castrated. You then turned to your, but somebody had taken it from castrated. You had once had a penis, but somebody had taken it from you. You then turn to your father and love your father because your father has a penis, so he's a sort of penis substitute. You reject your mother, who's equally things, he said. Satisfaction. That this could happen, that just don't behave. Person is.
Where is it? Where is it?
But somebody said,
Oh.
you had once in your development that you lacked a penis. In your development that you lacked a penis. And
Come on, come on.
this is not your development that you lack. This is not, and love your father. Now, if that's the sort of thing you know about Freud, he's well known of penis envy. Representations related to this theory of penis is an account of a developmental state of penis envy.
Okay, we're good, we're good.
An account of a developmental state that every one of you who is female has gone through, according to Freud. And
Oh my God, yes.
at some point in your development that you lacked.
One of the best sources. How has no one used this stuff for YouTube pooping yet?
Inferred at that point that you had been castrated. You had once
You could get him to say anything.
taken it from you. You then turn to your father and love your father because your father has a penis, so he's a sort of penis substitute. You reject your mother, who's equally unworthy due to her penis lack, and that shapes your psychosexual development. Now, if that's the sort of thing you know about Freud, you are not going to have a very high opinion of him or of his work. But at the core of Freud's explanation, the more interesting ideas is a set of claims of immense intellectual importance. And the two main ones are this. The two main
Oh,
ones
did I run
are
out of
the
time?
existence
Holy shit.
of an unconscious motivation, and the notion of unconscious dynamics or unconscious conflict, which lead to mental illnesses, dreams, slips of the tongue, and so on. The first idea, the idea of unconscious motivation, involves rejecting the claim that you know what you're doing. So suppose you fall in love with somebody and you decide you want to marry them. And then somebody was asked to ask you why. And you'd say something like, well, I'm ready to get married at this stage in my life. I really love the person is smart and attractive. I want to have kids, whatever. And maybe this is true. But a Freudian might say that even if this is your honest answer, you're not lying to anybody else, still, the desires and motivations that govern your behavior you may not be aware of.
All right, I'm going to exclusively focus on an advanced war for a while.
Because he reminds you of your father, or because you want to get back at somebody for betraying you. If somebody was to tell you this, you'd say, that's total nonsense. But that wouldn't deter a Freudian. A Freudian would say that these processes are unconscious. So, of course, you just don't know what's happening. So the radical
YouTube poop enjoyers.
You might
but the thing is,
why you do what you do.
Why not the other lectures too? There are so many of these.
Perception. We accept that you look around the world and you get sensations and you figure out there's a car, there's a tree, there's a person, and you just
I hate even thinking it, but I always get a little uncomfortable when
apply to things like why you're now studying at Yale.
When you see some very clearly Japanese-inspired military commanders in an advanced war game, there's not good psychological associations with that.
Where this sort of unconscious motivation might.
You know what? Never mind. Oh.
And not know why. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where
Andy!
You're doing something or you're arguing for
I think I kind of like Adder.
For reasons that you can't fully articulate.
They call him high tier.
Have you ever forgotten somebody's name?
And he's easier to understand for me at my current level.
In the throes of passion. This is all the Freudian unconscious. The idea is that we do these things. These things are explained in terms of
nice.
systems that we're not
Super simple.
Now, all of this would be fine if your unconscious was a reasonable, rational computer. If your unconscious was really smart and looking out for your best interest. But according to Freud, that's not the way it works. According to Freud, there are 3 distinct processes going on in your head. And these are in violent interactions.
Where's the HQs? I guess it's labs we're going after?
Are products not of a single rational.
So I just have to capture both of them.
A set of conflicting creatures. And these 3 parts are the id, the ego.
What the hell? What is a boat doing on the HQ tile?
The id, according to Freud,
I have no control over it.
It's the animal part of the self. It wants to eat, drink, pee, poop, get warm, and have sexual satisfaction. It is outrageously stupid. It works on what Freud called the pleasure principle. It wants pleasure, and it wants it now. And that's, according to Freud, how a human begins. Pure id.
Also, I need more mental stimulation. We're going to be dual wielding again.
Desire for pleasure. Now, unfortunately, life doesn't work like that.
I actually won a chess match like this.
And this leads to a set of reactions to cope with the fact that pleasure isn't always there when you want it. Either by planning how to satisfy your desires or planning how to suppress them. And this system is known as the ego, or the self. And it works on the reality principle.
Geez, give me a minute.
It works on the principle of trying to figure out how to make your way through the world, how to satisfy your pleasures, or in some cases, how to give up on them. And the ego, the emergence of the ego for Freud symbolizes the origin of consciousness. Finally, if this was all there was, it might be a simpler world. But Freud had a third component, that of the superego. And the superego is the internalized rules of parents and society. So what happens in the course of development is you're just trying to make your way through the world and satisfy your desires, but sometimes you're punished for them. Some desires are inappropriate, some actions are wrong, and you're punished for it. The idea is that you come out, you get in your head a superego, a conscience. In these movies, it'd be like the little...
Oh yeah, Token was there in real life.
Tells you when things are wrong. And basically, yourself, the ego, is in between the id and the superego. One thing to realize, I told you the id is outrageously stupid. It just says, oh, hungry, food, sex, oh, let's get warm, oh. The superego is also stupid. The superego, according to Freud, is not some brilliant moral philosopher telling you about right and wrong. The superego is like, you should be ashamed of yourself. That's disgusting. Stop doing that. Oh. And in between these two screaming creatures, one of them telling you to seek out your desires, the other one telling you should be ashamed of yourself, is you, is the ego. Now, according to Freud, most of this is unconscious. So we see, bubbling up to the top, we feel, we experience ourselves. And the driving of the id, the forces of the id and the forces of the superego are unconscious in that we cannot access them. We don't know what, it's like the workings of our kidneys or our stomachs. You can't introspect and find them. Rather, they do their work without conscious knowledge. Now, Freud developed this. This is the Freudian theory in broad outline. He extended it and developed it into a theory of psychosexual development. And so Freud's theory is, as I said before, a theory of everyday life, of decisions, of errors, of falling in love, but it's also a theory of child development. So Freud believed there were 5
All right, I'm going for the neutral base. I'm following the expert advice for a while.
and each is associated with a particular erogenous zone. And Freud believed as well that if you have a problem at a certain stage, if something goes wrong, you'll be stuck there. So according to Freud, there are people in this room who are what they are because they got stuck in the oral stage or the anal stage. And that's not good.
That's not good.
So the oral stage is when you start off. The mouth is associated with pleasure. Everything is sucking and chewing and so on. And the problem for Freud is premature weaning of a child, depriving him of the breast, could lead to serious problems in his personality development. It could make him, as the phrase goes, into an oral person. And his orality could be described literally. Freud uses as an explanation for why somebody might eat too much, or chew gum, or smoke. They're trying to achieve satisfaction through their mouth of a sort they didn't get in this very early stage of development. But it can also be more abstract. If your roommate is dependent and needy, you could then go to your roommate and say, you're an oral person. The first year of your life did not go well. A phrase even more popular is the anal stage, and that happens after the oral stage, and problems can emerge if toilet training is not handled correctly. If you have problems during those years of life, you could become an anal personality. According to Freud, and your roommate could say, your problem is you're too anal. And according to Freud, literally, it meant you were unwilling to part with your own feces. It's written down here, I know, it's true. And the way it manifests itself, as you know from just how people talk, is you're compulsive, you're clean, you're stingy. This is the anal personality. Then it gets a little bit more complicated. The next stage is the phallic stage. Actually, this isn't that much more complicated. The focus shifts to the genitals. Fixation can lead to excessive masculinity in females, or in males, or if you're female, need for attention or domination. Now, at this point, something really interesting happens, called the Oedipus complex. And this is based on a story, the mythical story of a king who killed his father and married his mother. And according to Freud, this happens to all of us in this way. Well, by all of us, Freud meant men. So here's the idea. You're 3 or 4 years old. You're in the phallic stage.
All so 3 of their bases. I see 1, 2.
And then you seek an external object. Freud's sort of vague about
click
this,
it.
But,
Oh yeah, that is a base.
You seek some sort of satisfaction.
Okay, where are my 3 bases? 1, 2.
And loving and wonderful.
There's an airport.
Mom.
He has an airport.
So the child infers, Mom
1,
is nice.
2. I don't see a third base for me.
So far, this is not crazy. Little boy falling in love with his mother. Problem. Dad's in the way. Now, this is going to get progressively weirder, but I will have to say, as the father of two sons, both sons went to a phase where they explicitly said they wanted to marry Mummy and me. If something bad happened to me, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So there's this, but now it gets a little bit aggressive. So the idea is the child determines that he's going to kill his father. But then, because children, according to Freud, don't have a good sense of the boundary between their mind and the world, which is a problem. The problem is they think their father can tell that they're plotting to kill him. And they figure their father is now angry at them. And then they ask themselves, what's the worst thing Dad could do to me? And the answer is castration. So they come to the conclusion that their father is going to castrate them.
Lower right, you both started with 2. 1, 2, 3. Oh, yeah, I see it now. Why wasn't I counting it just now?
Think about sex for several years. And that's the latency stage. The latency stage is they've gone through this huge thing with Mom and Dad. Fell in love with Mom, wanted to kill my father. Dad was going to castrate me. Fell out of love with Mom, out of the sex business. And sex is repressed until you get to the genital stage. And the genital stage is the stage we are all in, the healthy adult stage.
Really?
Now that you're adults and you've gone through all the developmental stages, where do you stand? You're not out of the woods yet. Because unconscious mechanisms are still, even if you haven't got fixated or anything, there's still this dynamic going on all the time with your id, your ego, and your superego. And the idea is your superego, remember your superego is stupid. So your superego isn't only telling you not to do bad things, it's telling you not to think bad things. So what's happening is your id is sending up all of this weird, sick stuff, all of these crazy sexual and violent desires. Oh, I'll kill him. I'll have sex with that. I'll have extra helpings on my dessert. And your superego say, no, no, no. And this stuff is repressed. It doesn't even make it to consciousness. The problem is Freud had a very sort of hydraulic theory of what goes on. And some of this stuff slips out. And it shows up in dreams, and it shows up in slips of the tongue, and in exceptional cases it shows up in certain clinical symptoms. So what happens is, Freud described a lot of normal life as in terms of different ways we use to keep that horrible stuff from the id making its way to consciousness. And he called these defense mechanisms. You're defending yourself against the horrible parts of yourself. And some of these make a little bit of sense. I mean, one way to describe this in a non-technical, non-Freudian way is there's certain things about ourselves we'd rather not know. There's certain desires we'd rather not know, and we have ways to hide them. So for instance, there's sublimation. Sublimation is you might have a lot of energy, maybe sexual energy or aggressive energy, but instead of turning it to a sexual or aggressive target, what you do is you focus it in some other way. So you can imagine a great artist like Picasso turning the sexual energy into his artwork. There's displacement. Displacement is you have certain shameful thoughts or desires, and you refocus them more appropriately. A boy who's bullied by his father may hate his father and want to hurt him. But since this is very shameful and difficult, the boy might instead kick the dog and think he hates the dog, because that's a more acceptable target. There's projection. Projection is I have certain impulses I'm uncomfortable with. So rather than own them myself, I project them to somebody else. A classic example for Freud is homosexual desires. The idea is that I feel this tremendous lust towards you, for instance, and any of you, all of you, you three. And I'm ashamed of this lust. So what I say is, hey, are you guys looking at me in a sexual manner? Are you lusting after me? How disgusting. Because what I do is I take my own desires and I project it to others. And Freud suggested, perhaps not implausibly, that men who believe other men, who are obsessed with the sexuality of other men, are themselves projecting away their own sexual desires. There's rationalization, which is that when you do something or think something bad, you rationalize it and you give it a more socially acceptable explanation.
I am getting my ass kicked by Yano Pazzo. Oh, he's a much higher level chess guy than me.
Not say, I enjoy smacking my child. Rather, we'll say, it's for the child's
maybe...
I'm being a good parent by doing this. And finally, there is regression, which is returning to an earlier stage of development. And you actually see this in children. In times of stress and trauma, they'll become younger. They will act younger. They might cry, they might suck their thumb, seek out a blanket, or so on. Now, these are all mechanisms that for Freud are not the slightest bit pathological. They're part of normal life.
You could move your mech into the boat, then unload it. It's going in that direction.
Among the different systems.
I can't get my mech to a beach in
Sometimes
time.
it doesn't work.
Oh, what about
Sometimes
this one,
things
though?
go awry.
Yeah,
And
let's do that.
what happens is a phrase that's not currently used in psychology, but was
I'm still
popular
getting my
during
ass
Freud's
utterly
time,
kicked.
Hysteria. Hysteria includes phenomena like
What
hysterical
I have playing without HQs is throwing me for a loop. It's different than what I'm used to.
paralysis, trembling, panic attacks, gaps of memory, including amnesia, and so on. And the idea is that these are actually symptoms. These are symptoms of mechanisms going on to keep things unconscious. It's a common enough idea in movies. Often in movies, what happens is somebody goes to an analyst. They have some horrible problem. They can't remember something, or they have some sort of blackouts and so on. And the analyst tells them something. And at one point, they get this insight, and they realize why they've blinded themselves, why they can't remember. And for Freud, this is what happens. Freud originally attempted to get these memories out through hypnosis, but then moved to the mechanism of free association. And according to Freud, the idea is patients offer resistance to this, and then the idea of a psychoanalyst is to get over the resistance and help patients get insight. The key notion of psychoanalysis is your problems are actually
Why do you do so many things at once? Because I need stimulation. Oh my god, I have a turn going in chess.
you know what's going on for deeper phenomena, your problems will go away. I'm going to give you an example of a therapy session. Now, this is not a Freudian analysis. We'll discuss later on in the course what a Freudian analysis is.
I'm doing so many things at once because I was tired of waiting more than 25 seconds for the next match.
This is not a pure Freudian analysis. Freudian analysis, the person is lying on a couch, does not see their therapist. Their therapist is very non-directive. But I'm going to present this as an example here because it illustrates so many of the Freudian themes, particularly themes about dreams, the importance of dreams, about repression, and about hidden meaning. So this is from a television episode, and the characters, some of you may have seen this, many of you will not have. The character is suffering from panic attacks. In particular, he has panic attacks when he sees, his first panic attack originated when he walked to a swimming pool and he saw a family of ducks fly away. And he had a panic attack. High heart pounding, sweating, flushed, and then he passed out. And these panic attacks grew worse and worse until he saw a therapist who ended up prescribing him medication. And this is discussed as one of the meetings he had with the therapist. Freud's contributions extend beyond the study of individual psychology and individual pathology. Freud had a lot to say about dreams, as you could see in this illustration. He believed that dreams had a manifest content, manifest meaning what you experience in your dream. But dreams always had a latent content as well, meaning the hidden implication of the dream. He viewed all dreams as wish fulfillment. Every dream you have is a certain wish you have, even though
fuck off.
forbidden wish that you wouldn't wish to have, you wouldn't want to have. And dreams had,
Cannot
and this is an idea long
second that
Freud,
notion.
dreams had symbolism. Things in dreams were often not what they seemed to be, but rather symbols for other things.
Maybe the Romans had it more right than Freud
believed that
did.
Literature and fairy tales and stories to children and the like.
Okay, less than 1
carry,
minute of chess.
Certain
Bam.
universal themes, certain aspects of unconscious struggles, and certain preoccupations of our unconscious mind. And Freud had a lot to say about religion. For instance,
I have the time
he viewed
to think in
large
advance
part
words, but not in
of
chess. Chess is going to take priority.
the idea of
Okay, maybe I should switch back and forth depending on what the clocks are
as
looking like.
seeking out a father figure that some of us never had.
I am playing multiple things at once because I'm
What I
seeking
wanna spend
greater
the
and
rest of the
greater
class on
heights of
is the scientific assessment of Freud. So what I did was, so far as
understanding of the
what
gaming
Freud had to
medium.
say in broad outline, I then want to take the time to consider whether or not we should believe this and how well it fits with our modern science. But before doing so, I'll take questions for a few minutes. Do people have any questions about Freud or Freud's theories? Yes?
So would a child who did not grow up in a two-parent family lack the Oedipus complex and other normal stages of development?
It's an excellent question. The question is, the conflicts and psychosexual development that Freud describes is always assumes that a child has a mother and a father, one of each, in a certain sort of familial structure. And the question then is, what if a child was raised by a single parent, for example?
Okay.
What if a child was never breastfed, but fed from the bottle from the start? And
Skip this.
Freudians have had problems with this. Freud
What do
was
I have?
very
9 minutes in AW.
focused on a family life. with
Chess.
the
We're up
people
against
he
a 120
interacted with,
level.
which
Okay,
was
hopefully
rather
this guy will be
upper-class
easier than the
European.
last one. I have actually won 2 chess games so far while doing that.
I imagine
This
that
is
what a Freudian would
mind-blowing.
have to say is you would expect systematic differences. So you would expect a child who just grew up with a mother, or just grew up to be a father, with a father, to be in some sense psychologically damaged by that, failing to go through the normal psychosexual stages. Yes? The question is, do modern psychoanalysts still believe that women do not have superegos? Freud was, as you're pointing out, Freud was notorious for suggesting that women were morally immature relative to men. I think Freud would say that women had superegos. They're just not the sort of sturdy ones that men have. I think psychoanalysts and psychoanalytic scholars right now would be mixed. Some would maintain that there really are deep sex differences. Others would want to jettison that out.
Oh my god, there were HQs, and I said something stupid earlier because I kind of forgot because they're covered up by the, what do we do? Black boats. They're not even black.
Well, what sublimation is, a lot of these, it's a good question. The question is to sort of what is sublimation? How does it relate to other defense mechanisms? A lot of defense mechanisms involve taking a desire and turning it. Now, what displacement does is it takes it from you to her. Like, I'm angry at you, but maybe that's forbidden for some reason, so I'll be angry at her. What projection does is takes a desire from me and then puts it on somebody else heading outwards. And what sublimation does is it just gives up the details and keeps the energy. So you stay up, you know, your roommate stays up all night working. And you say to your roommate, for instance, that's just because you haven't had sex in a long time, and you want to have sex, so you devote all your energy to your math exam. And then you say, that's sublimation. I learned that in intro psych. And your roommate would be very pleased.
Oh man.
One more question.
I do not remember my friends like that strongly. The most annoying kinds of friends in college are the ones who take intro to psych and then think they can predict you.
The question is, which is related to the issue, extending the
neat.
issue
We have
of
two
the two parent
units.
versus one parent family, is to what extent are these notions validated cross-culturally? And that's such a good question. I'm going to defer it. I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes, because that speaks to the issue of the scientific assessment of Freud. So I'm going to try to get to your question in a little bit. Freudian theory is now, at this point in time, extremely controversial. And there's a lot of well-known criticisms and attacks on Freud. This is just actually an excellent book on the memory wards by Frederick Crews, and Frederick Crews is one of the strongest and most passionate critics of Freud. And the problems with Freud go like this. There are two ways you could reject a theory. There are two problems with a scientific theory. One way you could reject a theory is that it could be wrong. So suppose I have a theory that the reason why some children have autism, a profound developmental disorder, is because their mothers don't love them enough. This is a popular theory for many years. It's a possible theory, it just turns out to be wrong. But another way, and so one way to attack and address a scientific theory is to view it as just to see whether or not it works. But there's a different problem a theory could have. A theory could be so vague and all-encompassing that it can't even be tested. This is one of the main critiques of Freud. The idea could be summed up by a quotation from the physicist Wolfgang Pauli. And Pauli was asked his opinion about another physicist. And Pauli said this: "That guy's work is crap. He's not right. He's not even wrong." And the criticism about Freud is that he's not even wrong.
Okay, let's see what this gets me.
Vagueness is summarized in a more technical way by the philosopher Karl Popper, who introduced the
Especially since they
term
have
of
anti-air and
falsifiability.
artillery now. Okay, yes,
The
yes.
idea of
I will do it, Curb
falsifiability
Boy.
Is that what distinguishes
Mechs are too slow to
science
counter either of those,
from
plus infantry can fight
non-science
mechs while
is that
costing
scientific
word.
predictions make
Alright, we'll do
strong
tanks
claims
for a
about
while.
the
Oh
world,
yes, look at that. An
and
opportunity to
these
use a
claims
tank
are of a
right
sort
here
that
already.
They could be proven wrong. If they couldn't be proven wrong, they're not interesting enough to be science. So for example, within psychology, the sort of claims we'll be entertaining throughout the course include claims like damage to the hippocampus causes failures of certain sorts of memory. Or everywhere in the world, men, on average, want to have more sexual partners than women. Or exposure to violent television tends to make children themselves more violent. Now, are they true or are they false? Well, we'll talk about that. But the point here is they can be false. They're interesting enough that they can be tested. And as such, they might be wrong, but they graduate to the level of a scientific theory. This should be contrasted with non-scientific programs, and the best example of a non-scientific program is astrology. So the problem with astrological predictions is not that they're wrong, it's that they can't be wrong. They're not even wrong. I got my horoscope for today on the web. A couple of negative aspects could make you a little finicky for the next few days. Okay, I want to watch for that. The presence of both Mars and Venus suggests you want to box everything into a neat, ordered, structured way, but keeping a piece of jade or carnelian close will help you keep in touch with your fun side. And starting this morning, I got from my wife a little piece of jade, and I have been sort of in touch with my fun side. The problem is, a few days aren't going to go by. I said, God, that was wrong. It can't be wrong. It's just so vague. I got a better horoscope from The Onion, actually. Riding in a golf cart with snow cone in hand, you'll be tackled by 2 police officers this week after matching a composite caricature of a suspected murderer. Now, that's a good prediction, because wow, if it turns out to be true, I'm going to say those guys really know something.
Oh my god, I completely neglected chess for too long. Holy cow, I made a really good move and I felt good about myself and then forgot.
Because Freudian theory is often so vague and flexible that it can't really be tested in any reliable way. A big problem of this is a lot of Freudian theory is claimed to be validated in the course of psychoanalysis. So when you ask people, why do you believe in Freud? They won't say, oh, because of this experiment, this data set, and that data set. What they'll say is, the Freudian theory proves itself in the course of psychoanalysis, the success of psychoanalysis. But it's unreliable.
Where'd the king go?
I mean, the problem
There he
is,
is,
say
okay.
Freud says to a patient, you hate your mother. The patient says, wow, that makes sense. Freud says, I'm right. Freud says, you hate your mother. The patient says, no, I don't. It's terrible. That's disgusting. Freud says, your anger shows this idea is painful for you. You repressed it from time. I am right. and the problem is, the same sort of dynamic plays itself out even in the scientific debate back and forth. So Freudian psychologists, I'm putting Freud here, but what I mean is well-known defenders of Freud, will make some claims like, adult personality traits are shaped by the course of psychosexual development. All dreams are disguised wish fulfillment. Psychoanalysis is the best treatment for mental disorders. Scientists will respond, I disagree. There's little or no evidence supporting those claims. And the Freudian response is, your rejection of my ideas shows that they are distressing to you. This is because I am right. And this is often followed up, seriously enough. You have deep psychological problems. And now I don't want to caricature Freudians. A lot of Freudians have tried and made a research program of extending their ideas scientifically, bringing them to robust scientific tests. But the problem is, when you make specific falsifiable predictions, they don't always do that well. So for instance, there's no evidence that oral and anal characteristics, the personality characteristics I talked about being needy versus being stingy, relate in any interesting way to weaning or toilet training. And there's been some efforts cross-culturally, to go back to the question this young man asked before, looking at cross-cultural differences in toilet training and weaning, which are really big differences, to see if they correspond in any interesting way.
Oh God, did I forget to buy tanks? Yeah, I think I did. Between the two games. I think I need to do exclusively an Advance War for the next one.
These have met with very little
I've not been able to elegantly juggle these like I can with Metal Gears.
Psychoanalysis proves itself by its tremendous success in curing mental illness is also almost certainly not true. For most, maybe not all, but for most psychological disorders, there are quicker and more reliable treatments than psychoanalysis. And there's considerable controversy as to whether the Tony Soprano method of insight, where you get this insight and this discovery, oh, now I know, makes any real difference in alleviating symptoms such as anxiety disorders or depression. This is why there's often a sticker shock when people go to a university psychology department, where they say, look, hey, so I'm in how can I take classes on Freud? Who's your expert on Freud? And the truth is, Freudian psychoanalysis is almost never studied inside psychology departments. Not the cognitive or developmental side, not the clinical side. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, even the people who do study Freud within psychology departments,
How am I getting? Oh, okay.
very few of them would see themselves as a psychoanalytic practitioner or as a Freudian psychologist. Freud lives on, both in a clinical setting and in a university, but Freud at Yale, for instance, is much more likely to be found in the history department or the literature department than in the psychology department. And this is typical enough. But despite all of the sour things I just said about Freud, the big idea, the importance of the dynamic unconscious, remains intact. We will go over and over and over again, different case studies, where some really interesting aspects of mental life prove to be unconscious. Now, there's one question, I'm actually going to skip over this for reasons of time, and just go to some examples of the unconscious in modern psychology. So, here's a simple example of the unconscious in modern psychology. Language understanding. So when you hear a sentence like, John thinks that Bill likes him, in a fraction of a second, you realize that this means that John thinks that Bill likes John. If you heard the sentence, John thinks that Bill likes himself, in a fraction of a second, you would think that it means John thinks that Bill likes Bill. And as we will get to when we get to the lecture on language, this is not conscious. You don't know how you do this. You don't even know that you are doing this, but you do it quickly and instinctively. So much of our day-to-day life can be done unconsciously. There are different activities you can do. Driving, chewing gum, shoelace tying, where if you're good enough at them, if you're expert enough at them, you
Hunt Showdown.
doing them. I was at a party a few years ago for a friend of mine, and we ran out of food. So he said, I'll just go pick up some food. An hour later, he was gone. Still gone. It was supposed to be around the corner. And we called him up on his cell phone. And he said, oh, I got on a highway and I drove to work. He works like an hour away. We got on the highway to drive. And some version of these things happen all the time. Maybe more surprising, Freud's insight that our likes and dislikes are due to factors that we're not necessarily conscious of has a lot of empirical support from research into social psychology, for example. So for instance, here's one finding from social psychology. If
I
somebody
don't
goes
know
through
if
a
the port's going to be
terrible
useful at all.
initiation to get into a club,
There are more important
They'll like the
things
club
to
more.
worry about. Is there still a possibility
might
of
think they
winning?
like it
Should I just
less.
resign and start a new one and give it
but
more
actually
concentration?
hazing is illegal, but a remarkably successful tool. The more you pay for something, the more
Oh,
you like it,
income.
and the more pain you go
I
through.
wasn't
to get
thinking of
something,
it
the
in
more you
those
like it.
terms. God.
From
God, I
the
have a long
standpoint
way to
of
go.
Of politics, for instance, if you want loyal people in a political campaign, do not pay them. If you pay them, they'll like you less. If they volunteer, they'll like you more. And we'll talk about why. There's different theories about why. But my point right now is simply that people don't necessarily know this, but still they're subject to this. Another example is some weird studies done in a discipline of social psychology known as terror management, which involves subliminal death primes. The idea of subliminal death primes is this. You sign up for your human subjects requirement, and then they put you in front of a computer screen. And then they tell you, oh, just sit in front of the computer screen and we'll ask you some questions. And then the questions come out, and they're questions like, how much do you love your country? What do you think of Asians? What do you think of Jews? What do you think of blacks? What do you think of vegetarians? What do you think of people's political views? Different from yours. Here's
There's
the
like
gimmick. What you don't
cornering
know is
someone.
on that computer screen, words are being flashed. Like that. But they're being flashed so fast it looks like that. You don't see anything. Words like corpse, dead, dying. The flashing of these subliminal words, subliminal meaning a fancy term, meaning below the level of consciousness, you don't know you're seeing them, has dramatic effects on how you answer those questions. People exposed to death primes become more nationalistic, more patriotic, less forgiving of other people, less liking of other races and people from other countries. Again, the explanation for why this is so is something which we'll get to in another class. The point now is simply to illustrate that these sort of things can have, that things you aren't aware of can have an effect on how you think. The final example I'll give of this is a short demonstration. To do this, I'm going to cut the class in half at this point. So you'll be on this side of the class, the right side, my right, and this will be on the left side. And I simply want everybody to think about somebody you love. So think about somebody you love, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your mom, your dad. Think about somebody you love. Just think about somebody you love. Okay. Now, on this screen is going to be instructions, but I want to give the instructions to this half of the class. So I'm going to ask everybody in this half of the class, please either turn your head or shut your eyes. Okay? Teaching fellows too. Okay. And everybody in this half, obey. Okay, have everybody read that? Okay.
Oh, they just made a Neo tank? I missed that.
Okay. Now, turn your head.
Okay, okay. I wanna see what happens when I give a match an exclusive
This group, look at
sense of focus anyway. So I'm fine with resigning and starting
Take
a
a
new
moment.
one.
You don't have to do it on paper.
It's
Take a
also,
moment to do it in your head.
so long as I set this
each
to
group has
unrated or rated,
instructions.
there's
Some people
no
might have seen those
not much
instructions. Follow the
time to
instructions
have to
left
wait
for you.
between matches anyway.
Now, this was research done by Norbert Schwartz, and here's the question I want you to ask yourself.
What happened?
How much do you like this person? And
What
here's
was
the
that?
effect. Half of you were asked to list 3 features of the
Okay, there we go.
half of you were asked to list 10. The
I'm not
finding,
gonna pick
which is not a
Flack
subtle
again. I
is that
learned my
liking goes
mistake.
up in the 3
But like, I don't
and liking goes
recognize.
down in the 10 group. And here's why.
Hang on, there's a guide I had here
I
somewhere.
have to think about 3
Plus one
positive
vision,
features
plus one vision.
of
Oh yeah, Sonja is absolutely useless for this mode.
I
What
think
the-
my girlfriend. I have a
maybe?
girlfriend. I think my girlfriend. But, oh, she's smart, she's beautiful, and she's kind. Good. How much? What do I think of her? Pretty good. Smart,
What's
beautiful,
happening?
kind, smart,
Live
beautiful.
queue.
Yeah. But the problem.
How
now
come
Schwartz is clever
it
though.
went
He says,
away?
the other group gets 10 positive features.
Ah!
Really nice, good cook. Punctual. Smart. No, I mentioned that. The problem is, nobody has 10 positive features. And the fact of being asked to do 10 positive features is people find this hard. And then,
Hey, Bedazzle, I'm
now,
definitely
how
not
much do you
winning.
like this person? Say,
2,
couldn't
1,
really make it
0.
that
It's
10.
counting
I guess I
down.
don't like them very much.
Waiting for opponent.
point
What
of
does
this
that
illustration,
mean? How can I
again,
get back to that
is
screen where
that
I was preparing?
It shows that you don't know this.
Q.
Subjects who are asked to do 10 positive features and then later rank the person lower,
View active?
and then ask, why did you rank the person lower? Don't say, because you told me to list 10. Typically, we are oblivious to these factors that change our points, what we like and what we dislike. And this is, in fact,
I don't remember
a substantial and important
feeling
part
ready.
of the study of psychology.
Let's
particularly, for
start
instance,
that
the
queue
study
over again.
of
I don't want to
racial and
commit to
sexual
whatever
prejudice,
mistake I might have just made.
where one of the big findings from social psychology, and we'll devote almost an entire lecture to this, is that people have strong views about other races that they don't know about, and that they don't know
The view
control
game
their actions.
notification.
So to some extent,
I don't know
this
if I'm
rounds out
seeing it.
Freud, because to some extent, the particulars of Freud are, for the most part, have been rejected. But the general idea of Freud has actually been so successful, both in the study of scientific psychology and in our interpretation of everyday life, that to some extent Freud's been a victim of his own success. We tend to underestimate the importance of Freudian thought in everyday life because he's transformed our worldview to such an extent that it's difficult for us to remember that there's any other way to think about it. So to some extent, he's been a victim of his own success. We have time for some further questions about Freud and about scientific implications of Freud. I took a class once on how to teach when I was a graduate student. And I just remember 2 things from this class. One thing is never grade in red pen. People don't like that. The second thing is never ask any questions, because people get frightened and say, any questions? And people find it's intimidating. I'm supposed to ask, what are your questions? So, what are your questions? Yes, and back.
Wait, did that work?
Sorry.
Did he just use a psychological trick on the students to get them to ask questions?
Medication. Freud had it's a good question. The question was,
What are your questions versus do you have questions?
How we deal with certain disorders now, particularly depression and anxiety disorders. On the one hand,
I picked the wrong one, unrated or rated. There we go. I was wondering why it was
studied the
taking
mind
2
and the
minutes.
brain and was intensely
Yeah, I
interested
just
in
noticed.
the
I just
neural
noticed.
basis of thought and behavior. But the answer to your question in the end is no. Although Freud was very sensitive to the brain basis of behavior, Freud was totally convinced
That'd work on me too, buddy.
would not be medication, but rather through the sort of talk therapy and insight. Moreover, modern therapists, including some people who aren't psychoanalytically defined, will say, look, these drugs are all well and good, but what they do is they mask the symptoms. So if you have panic attacks, say, it's true that drugs might make the panic attacks go away, but the panic attacks are actually not your real problem. And by making them go away, you don't get to the root of your problem.
I just heard a bunch of tires squealing.
Modern-day psychoanalysts would think that medications are substantially...
I think I just heard a
Yes.
a car flip over almost is what I think I just heard.
The question is, what about research on dreams? Dreams is such a fun topic that I'm going to devote half a class to sleeping and dreams. So for instance, I will answer the question, what is the most common
Unrated
dream?
or rated, standard.
I will also answer the question, who thinks about sex more in dreams, men or women?
Maybe my score, my rating is so low now that I'm not matching with people quickly.
Dreams from a Freudian standpoint.
How can I
There's been
profile?
some evidence that dreams do, in some, often do
800.
some
Win-loss
relationship to
draw.
what you're thinking about
That can't
and
be
worrying
right.
about through the day.
I,
The strong Freudian
that totally should be 040.
has not been supported by
All right, there we go. Accept.
What are
Okay,
your other
adder,
questions?
orange,
Yes, whoever Eric is.
and let's definitely look at this map before I go in.
Yes.
Can I propose a simpler?
The Electra complex? The Electra complex is the penis envy story. Freud developed,
I see one HQ. There's the other one, okay. This map is still a little more complicated. Your games,
Sigmund, they're
of
also women.
game, thinking. We can't change the map, can we?
And that story I told you with the penises and the penis envy and the replacement is a sort of a very shortened version of the Electra complex. I think it's fair to say that Electra complex was a sort of add-on to the main interest of Freud, the Oedipal complex.
Okay, there's bases 1, 2,
One more, please. Yes.
3, 4. One of the players starts with an infantry, the other one doesn't? Is that what I'm looking at?
According to Freud, it's not a fixation in the
No
stage
map
in the
changing.
same sense as an oral or anal stage. But yes, the claim that Freud would make is that the woman's discovery that she lacks the penis plays a fundamental
The penis. What is the thing with the?
allegiances in life, and in fact her own sexual preferences.
What is the thing with psychologists putting a capital T, the way I'm interpreting their voice anyway, in front of extremely common nouns? There's like, what, 1.5 billion penises on planet Earth, but we're fascinated with the penis. There's like 3 billion children, 2 billion children or whatever on planet Earth, and they say the child.
Begin by going back to Freud and hitting a couple of loose ends.
The
There was a point in
idea
the
of
lecture on
penis.
Wednesday,
The
where I
penis
skipped
sounds
over
like
some parts. I said, we don't have time for this, and I just whipped past it. And I couldn't sleep over the weekend, been tormented. I shouldn't have skipped that. And I want to bring, here, let me tell you why I skipped it.
This will be the last lecture of the night.
Was a discussion of why
What's going on with
we were
the
not unconscious at all.
match?
So it's talking
I
about
hit
the
ready a while ago and it's
respectable
not started, and I
ideas of Freud.
thought we only
And
had about
I wanna
60
talk
seconds
about
to
some
wait.
new ideas about why there could be an unconscious. Now, the reason why I skipped it is I'm not sure this is the best way to look at the question. As we will learn throughout the course,
Your
by
games.
far the vast majority of what our
Okay.
brains do, the vast majority of what our
Your turn.
minds
Okay,
do
now
is unconscious,
are we?
and we're unaware of.
Okay, okay, we're going.
So
We're
the right
going. 7
question
minutes.
to ask may not be why are some things unconscious, but rather
There's the bad guys.
why is this tiny
Okay.
subset of mental life, why is this conscious?
Let's go for the base first.
On the other hand,
Feel
these
free.
claims about the utility of unconsciousness I think are provocative and interesting, so I just wanted to quickly share them with you.
Please send advice.
So the question is, from an evolutionary standpoint, why would an unconscious evolve? And an answer
I need
that
it.
some psychologists and biologists have given
Try
is
refreshing. Yeah,
deception.
yeah, we're here.
So most animals do some deception. And deception, defined broadly, is simply act or be in some way that fools others into believing or thinking or responding to something that's false. There's physical examples of deception. When threatened, chimpanzees, their hair stands up on end, and that makes them look bigger, to fool others to thinking they're more dangerous than they are. There's an anglerfish at the bottom of the ocean that has a rod sticking up from the top of its head with a lure to capture other fish, to fool them in thinking that this is something edible, and then to themselves be devoured. But humans, primates in general, but particularly humans, are masters at deception. We use our minds and our behaviors and our actions continually.
They're victims
to
of
try to trick
dismemberment.
people
They're missing
into
V
believing
penis,
what's
the
not true.
masculinity they
We try to trick
represent.
people, for instance, into believing.
Well,
that
then why
we're
don't they
tougher,
use a different
smarter,
word?
Sexier, more reliable, more trustworthy, and so on, than we really are.
Why did they say the
And a large part of
penis
social psychology
instead of the
is way that we
masculinity?
present ourselves to other people so as to make them maximally
Right?
positive.
Like we're living in an age where 1% of the population or so has feminine penises. I don't think I'm having trouble parsing it sometimes.
Evolve very good lie detection mechanisms. So not only is there evolutionary pressure for me to lie to you, for me to persuade you, for instance, that if we're going to have a if you're threatening me, don't threaten me.
'Cause Freud was a
I'm not the
freak.
sort of man you could screw around with.
Yeah,
But
I'm
there's evolutionary pressure for you.
I feel like I can understand it better, and or it would at least just plain straight up makes more sense if you think of it in terms of masculinity envy instead of penis envy. Like yeah, women seem like they would very much like to have big, strong muscles and not be intimidated in parking lots, more so than, in my experience, than it having anything to do with the actual organ of the penis, right?
Illustrated with a story about Alfred Hitchcock. The story goes he hated working with child actors, but he often had to. And the story goes he was dealing with a child
Women
actor
aren't
who
lacking a
simply
penis.
could
They aren't
not
victims
cry.
of dismemberment. They're missing V penis.
And
We can just pick a different word, and suddenly it makes way more, or at least sounds way more believable.
Your parents have left you and they're never coming back. The kid burst into tears. Hitchcock said, roll him and film the kid. And the kid, if you were to see him, he really looks as if he's sad, because he was. If I had a competition of where I give $100,000.
Are you saying it's a
to the person
transphobic thing?
who
If
looks the most as if they are,
that is so.
it is a very
Oh man, if Freud was around right now, he probably would be a raving transphobe. Yeah.
as if you are in pain. If I want to persuade you that I love you, would never leave you. You could.
But then again, that's
It may be a superb tactic. For
an impossible hypothetical,
And
so
so this account of the evolution of the unconscious.
not the most useful thought experiment, I'm
is
guessing.
That certain
Should I be
motivations
tanking
involved
yet
in
or
these sinister
reconning?
are
We're gonna
better
double infantry
made to
again.
be unconscious, because if a person doesn't know they have them,
Oh man, I have 3 bases. That's wonderful. And I know I now have a much
something I think
clearer
we should return to
picture of how
later
to
on when we talk about
divide this thing into 2 clean halves.
relationships. One other thing on Freud.
Whatever you're gonna
it's
do
just
with
a
that
story
mech,
of
an
the
infantry would have done it
falsification of
faster.
Freud.
Yeah, I forgot I
taking a
even picked
younger
mech.
child home
That
from
might have
a
been
play date on
a
Sunday,
mistake click. Is this a
and he
crater? What
asked
is this
out of the
tile?
blue, why can't you marry your mother or your father? Now, that's actually a difficult question to answer for a child, but I tried my best to give him an answer. And then I said, then I thought back on a Freud lecture. And so I asked him, if you could marry anybody you want, who would it be? Imagining he'd make explicit the Oedipal complex and may name his mother. Instead, he paused for a moment and said, I would marry a donkey and a big bag of peanuts.
Peanuts envy.
Both his parents are psychologists, and he hates these questions, and sometimes he just screws around with us. Okay. Last class,
8, 9.
I started with Freud.
We're gonna recon.
And the story of Skinner.
Definitely.
And science
Okay,
is somewhat
Kerba.
different from the story
If
of
you don't have,
Freud.
think fast. We're gonna recon on south and send it to the west to screw around with them. We're gonna
It is as close
we're gonna
as you
tank
can
on the
find
north,
science
and we're gonna
itself.
infantry in the middle. Tank.
Obviously, he
Tank.
drew
Oh, I was looking at the wrong number. I have $6,000, not
psychoanalysis
$8,000.
identified
Okay, infantry and infantry. Maybe I should,
Behaviorism
if
is
I ever do pick.
Behaviorism is a school of thought that was there long before Skinner.
If I ever do pick
Like John Watson
mechs, they should be closer to the front than the infantry, I'm guessing.
into this. But the reason why we've heard of Skinner and why Skinner's so well known is he packaged these notions. He expanded upon them, he publicized them, he developed them scientifically and presented them both to the scientific
Teach
community
him is to
and
teach
to
it
the
all,
popular
including the
community.
dumb stuff.
And sociologically,
I will say that just using the word,
1960s,
or rather the double
behaviorism
two-word
was
pair,
incredibly well known, and so was Skinner.
the two-word pair, the penis, as a synonym for masculinity does explain a lot about how to make it make more sense.
He was the sort of person you would see on talk shows. His books were bestsellers. Now, at the core of behaviorism are three extremely radical and interesting.
Also, nowadays, like, I think most people just kind of think of penises and vaginas as the inverse of each other. Like, the sciences kind of prove they're made out of the same stuff, right? So it's like, it's not that big a deal anymore.
Views. The first is a strong emphasis on learning.
The way almost all this shit was wrong.
Is everything you know, everything you are, is the result of experience.
Oh, we got a tank on the
There's
south.
no real human.
Maybe they spawned that in response.
Rather, people are infinitely malleable. There's a wonderful quote from John Watson. And in this quote, John Watson is paraphrasing a famous boast by the Jesuits. The Jesuits used to claim, give me a child until the age of 7, and I'll show you the man. That they would take a child and turn him into anything they wanted. And Watson expanded on this boast. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train them to become the type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. Now, you could imagine, you could see in this a tremendous appeal to this view.
Yes.
Because Watson is an extremely
That sounds like
egalitarian view.
egalitarianism, right.
If there's no human nature, then there's no sense in which one group of humans, by dint of their race or their sex, could be better than another group. And Watson was explicit. None of those facts about people will ever make any difference. What matters to what you are is what you learn and how you're
As
treated.
soon as possible, so you can
And
keep
so
infantry
Watson
from
claimed he
cities
could
until a
create
tank comes with it. Also because they
anyone
move on tires, you need to
in
pay
any
attention.
way, simply
I think we're
because
past that
in a
point at this
certain
point. I
fashion.
got a recon, but it's going to be kind of useless by the look of things. Maybe I could
second
slowly send it up to the
aspect of
northwest,
behaviorism was
or use it
anti-mentalism.
to block the
And what I
tank for a
mean by
turn.
this is the behaviorists were obsessed with the idea of doing science. And they felt, largely in reaction to Freud, that claims about internal mental states, like desires, wishes, goals, emotions, and so on, are unscientific. These invisible, vague things can never form the basis of a serious science. And so the Behaviorist Manifesto would then be to develop a science without anything that's unobservable, and instead use notions like stimulus and response and reinforcement and punishment and environment that refer to real world and tangible events. Finally, behaviorists believe there were no interesting differences across species. A behaviorist might admit that a human can do things that a rat or pigeon couldn't. But a behaviorist might just say, look, those are just general associative powers that differ. Or they may even deny it. They might say humans and rats aren't different at all.
I guess the recon's going to get used to block the tank for a turn, because the tank definitely looks like it wants to close in on those guys down there. But nice, I have a tank of my own.
Which is, if
I have
they're all
money.
the same, then you could study human learning by studying non-human animals. And that's a lot of what they did. Okay. I'm going to frame my introduction, my discussion of behaviorism, in terms of the three main learning principles that they argued can explain all of
Wasn't there a way to combine the movement range preview of multiple units
objections to behaviorism,
and
but these three principles are powerful,
fill the map up
very
with
interesting.
blobs?
The first is habituation. This is the very simplest form of learning. And what this is technically described as a decline in a tendency to respond to stimuli that are familiar due to repeated exposure. Hey! Hey! The sudden noise startles. But
Yeah, there we go. I
as you
remember
heard, the
now.
second time, it startles less. Third time, it's just me being goofy. You get used to things. Now, and this, of course, is common enough in everyday life. We get used to the ticking of a clock or the noise of traffic. But it's actually a very important form of learning, because imagine life without it. Imagine life where you never got used to anything, where, suddenly somebody steps forward and waves their hand, you go, ah, and then they wave their hand, go, ah, and you keep, and there's a loud ticking of a clock, and you say, And, that's not the way animals or humans work. You get used to things. And it's actually critically important to get used to things, because it's a useful adaptive mechanism to keep track on new events and objects. It's important to notice something when it's new.
It chose a way better CO than you. You don't usually pick a tier 4 when tier 2 ones are available.
But you can't keep on
What does that mean?
noticing it. And in fact, you should stop.
Also, there's just like, they're just objectively better than one another. There's no checks and
So
balances.
this counts as learning because it happens through experience. It's a way to learn through
I was
experience.
afraid of
Change
that.
your way of thinking through experience. And also it's useful because harmful stimuli are noticed, but when something has shown itself to be part of the environment, you don't notice it anymore.
This game is not
Persistence
balanced.
of habituation is important for many reasons. One thing it's important for is clever developmental psychologists have used habituation as a way to study creatures who can't talk, like non-human animals and young babies.
Yeah, I've seen the
When I talk
tears.
on Wednesday about developmental psychology, I'll show different ways in which psychologists have used habituation to study the minds of young babies. The second sort of learning is known as classical conditioning. And what this is, in a very general sense, is the learning of an association between one stimulus and another stimulus, where stimulus is a technical term meaning events in an environment, like a certain smell or sound or sight. It was thought up by Pavlov. This is Pavlov's famous dog. And it's an example of scientific serendipity. Pavlov, when he started this research, had no interest at all in learning. He was interested in saliva. And to get saliva, he had to have dogs, and he had to attach something to dogs so that their saliva would pour out so he could study saliva. No idea why he wanted to study saliva. But he then discovered something. What he would do is he put food powder in the dog's mouth to generate saliva. But Pavlov observed that when somebody entered the room who typically gave him the food powder, the dog the food powder, saliva would start to come out. And later on, if you right before or right during you give the dog some food, you ping a bell, the bell will cause the saliva to come forth.
The saliva?
And in fact, this is the apparatus that he used for his research. He developed the theory of classical conditioning by making a distinction between two sorts of conditioning, two sorts of stimulus-response relationships. One is unconditioned.
Hang on. I just now realized. My superpower is that my units get to move a couple squares more. This guy's superpower is that his movements get to move for as many squares as they are worth again. Ah!
Is when an unconditioned stimulus gives rise to an unconditioned response. And this is what you start off with. So, if somebody pokes you with a stick...
I think we just gotta hunker down for a turn until
poking and ouch is an unconditioned stimulus causing
reinforcements arrive.
You didn't have to learn that. When Pavlov put food
Which
powder
base
in
am
the
I
dog's mouth
selecting?
and saliva was generated.
Which base am I okay, it must be this one.
Unconditioned response. But what happens through learning is that another association develops, that between the conditioned stimulus and the conditioned response.
I kind of want a mech here to harass the tank. I don't have enough money to really properly counter it. 3, 2, 1, plus 1700 will be 1800, 7, 14.
The bell was nothing. The bell was
I kind of want to save money for a turn. Is that ever a good idea? Ever? Let's find out.
Pretty soon, the bell will generate saliva. And now the bell, when you start off with the unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, when the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus are brought together over and over and over again, pretty soon the conditioned stimulus gives rise to the response.
A mech wouldn't be terrible. Oh, no, now I hear it.
This is discussed in detail in the textbook, but I'm going to give it, don't panic if you don't get it.
Okay, that's the first blood, right? Wait, no, it's not.
Examples. So the idea here is
yeah, there we go, now it is.
The unconditioned stimulus and the conditioned stimulus will give rise to the response. And
not that bad.
Between reinforced
we're not that bad off.
and unreinforced trials. A reinforced trial is when the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus go together. And to put it in a crude way, you're teaching the dog that the bell goes with the food. An unreinforced trial is when you get the food without the bell. You're not teaching the dog this. And in fact, once you teach an animal something, if you stop doing the teaching, the response goes away. And this is known as...
Oh, they got a helicopter?
So here's a graph.
Where's my... There's my airport.
If you get they really count the number of cubic centimeters of saliva. The dog is trained so that when the bell comes on... Actually, I misframed it. I'll try again. When the bell comes connected with food, there's a lot of saliva. An unreinforced response is when the
you can block helicopters with infantry, right?
So it's like, imagine you're the dog. So you get food in the mouth, bell, food.
I think I remember some kind of nonsense game logic trick like that.
But next,
from the single-player
bell,
GBA games.
Bell. You give it up. You stop.
Anti-air and tank, okay.
Responding.
I guess anti-air north,
A weird
tank
thing,
also north,
which is discussed in the textbook is,
and then leftovers for the south.
And then you try it again with the bell after a couple of hours. The saliva comes back. This is known as spontaneous recovery. So this all seems a very technical
How does he have so many more units than me already?
Related to animals and the like. But it's easy to see how it generalizes and how it extends. One interesting notion is that of stimulus generalization. And stimulus generalization is the topic of one of your articles in the Norton Reader, the one by Watson.
Good God, look at that.
Behaviors, who reported a bizarre experiment with a baby known as
How much
Little
movement range do I have?
And here's the idea. Little Albert originally liked rats.
Immediately
In fact, I'm going to show you a movie of Little Albert.
inferior. I still don't understand a lot of the game logic here.
Now Watson did something interesting. As little Albert was playing with the rat, oh, I like rats, oh.
Rats are fun,
Watson
though.
went behind the baby. This is it's in the chapter. And bang, the metal bar right near. Baby, ah! Screamed, started to sob. Okay. What's the unconditioned stimulus? Somebody. The loud noise, the bar, the bang. What's the unconditioned response?
Oh, come on. That should have killed it, I
Pride,
thought.
sadness, misery. And as a result of this, little Albert grew afraid of the rat. So there, what would be the conditioned stimulus? The rat. What would be the conditioned response? Fear. Excellent. Moreover, this fear extended to other things. So this is a very weird and unpersuasive clip. But the idea is, the clip is to make the point that the fear will extend to a rabbit, a white rabbit. So the first part, little Albert's fine with the white rabbit. The second part is after he's been conditioned, and he's kind of freaked out with the white rabbit. The problem is in the second part, they're throwing the rabbit at him.
Also, rabbits and like a cute domesticated rat aren't probably going to look immediately super different to a kid who might have had negative experiences with the little big-eared rodent animal already. Is that something they accounted for in the experiment?
Like that?
That the kid was like already predisposed to be wary of small rodent creatures?
This is one of a long list of experiments that we can't do anymore.
Yeah.
So, classical conditioning is more than a laboratory phenomena. The findings of classical conditioning have been extended and replicated in all sorts
Okay,
of animals,
the mech might actually come in useful here.
crabs, fish, cockroaches, and so on.
Jeez, they screwed that kid up.
To be an extension.
Good God. That is monstrous.
It's argued to underlie certain interesting aspects of human responses.
I feel like I'm making a
One
push
example is
here.
fear. So the little
Okay, I have
Albert
17
idea,
units, they have 32, mine are
little Albert
lower
experiment provides an
valued.
illustration
And I have less
for
income, but I feel
phobias
like
that emerge.
my numbers are a little higher on
Phobias.
the front lines,
Imagine you're afraid of dogs.
chopping it up into two halves.
Possible story for why he became afraid of dogs is that one day a dog came up and he was a neutral stimulus, no problem, and all of a sudden he bit you. Now the pain of a bite, being bit, and then the pain and fear of that is an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. You're just born with that, ow. But the presence of the dog there is a conditioned stimulus, and so you grew to be afraid of dogs. If you believe this, this also forms the basis for a theory of how you can make phobias go away. How do you make conditioned stimulus, conditioned response links go away? Well, what you do is you extinguish them. How do you extinguish them? Well, you show the thing that would cause you to have the fear without the unconditioned stimulus. Here's an illustration.
Yeah, my tanks. These two
These
tanks in the middle might be able to
simultaneously
snowball
finding
into
the
something
fear
more
of
useful.
heights
Oh!
in the dark because he's trapped in that thing.
Oh.
And the logic is not bad. He's stuck in there. Those are all the conditioned stimulus, but nothing bad happens. So his fear goes away. The problem with this is, while he's stuck in there, he has a screaming, horrific panic attack. And then it makes his fear much worse. So what they do now, though, and we'll talk about this much later in the course when we talk about clinical psychology, but one cure for phobias does draw upon, in a more intelligent way, the behaviorist literature. So the claim about a phobia is that there's a bad association between, say, dog in fear, or between airplanes or snakes and some bad
Between George and
So what they do is
Airbnbs.
what's called systematic desensitization, which
7 and
is
5.
they expose you to what causes you
Okay.
to fear, but they relax you at the same time. So you
Slowed him down
replace
for
the
a turn.
aversive, classical conditioned fear with something more
It's
positive.
not a bad way to take a hit.
Traditionally, they used to teach people relaxation exercises, but that proves too difficult. So nowadays, they just pump you full of some drug. It gets you really happy. And so you're really stoned out of your head. You're there with the dog and say, this isn't so bad. It's more complicated than that.
Okay, a tank
But the notion is you
got
can
my
use
tank, but that
these
means it
associated
pulled
tools
away from
perhaps
this city
to,
here in the middle.
to deal
Real
with
close to his
those
HQ,
fear
by the way.
focus,
I wonder if I
and
could
they go away.
exploit this.
Hunger.
Yeah, I'm feeling surprisingly in control of things despite my
We'll
numbers,
spend some time in this course discussing
my economy
why
numbers
we
being
eat and
lower
when
at
we eat.
least.
And one answer to why we eat and when we eat is that there's cues in the environment.
I
that
might still
associate
lose, but I at least will lose more
these
gracefully
cues
this
generate,
time.
Hunger. For those of you who are trying to quit smoking, you'll notice that there's time, or quit drinking, there's times of the day or certain activities that really make you want to smoke or really make you want to drink. And from a behaviorist point of view, this is because of the associative history of these things. More speculatively, classical conditioning has been argued to be implicated in the formation of sexual desire, including fetishes. So a behaviorist story about fetishes, for instance, is it's straightforward classical conditioning. Just as your lover's caress brings you to orgasm, your eyes happen to fall upon the shoe. Through the simple tools of classical conditioning, then, the shoe becomes a conditioned stimulus, giving rise to the conditioned response of sexual pleasure. This almost certainly is not the right story. But again, just as in phobias, some ideas of classical conditioning may play some role in determining what we like and what we don't like sexually. And in fact, one treatment for pedophiles and rapists involved controlled fantasies during masturbation to shift the association from domination and violence, for instance, to develop a more positive associations with sexual pleasure. So the strong classical conditioning stories about fetishes and fears sound silly in the extreme, and they probably are. But at the same time, classical conditioning can be used at least to shape the focus of our desires and of our interest. Final thought exercise. Oh yeah, okay, so what do we think about classical conditioning? We talked about what habituation is for. What's classical conditioning for? Well, a traditional view is it's not for anything. It's just association. So what happens is the UCS and the CS, the bell and the food, go together because they happen at the same time. And so classical conditioning should be the strongest when these two are simultaneous. And the response to one is the same as the response to the other. This is actually no longer the mainstream view. The mainstream view is now a little bit more interesting. It's that what happens in classical conditioning is preparation. What happens is you become sensitive to a cue that an event is about to happen, and that allows you to prepare for the event. This makes certain predictions. It predicts that the best timing is when the condition...
Look at this, I'm right at his
which is the
HQ.
signal.
I won't be able to capture it anytime soon, but I have, I guess I have map control now. I guess that's what you would call what I've managed to do here.
May be different
What is the term for when they are now reacting to me instead of vice
Imagine a
versa?
child who's being
Even though it looks like they
by
have
his
a
father, and when his father
economically
leaves,
superior force
he
on
flinches.
paper.
Well, that's classical conditioning. What happened in that case is he has learned that the raising of a hand is a
I might
signal
need to rush
that
over
gives
to
him a
my own
hit.
HQ though and prevent the same
And so
thing.
he responds to that signal. His flinch is not the same response that one would give if one's hit. If you're hit, you don't flinch. If you're hit, you might feel pain or bounce back or something.
Oh yeah, look at that. Infantry are actually blocking the helicopter. That's so funny.
On the classical conditioning
Let's
is,
exploit it.
That the response is sort of a preparation.
Hmm.
The conditioned response is a preparation.
Oh yeah, nah.
Classical conditioning shows up all over the place. As a final exercise in how to think about it, Has anybody here seen the movie Clockwork Orange? A lot of you. It's kind of a shocking movie and unpleasant and very violent. But at its core, one of the main themes.
Oh,
is,
power is ready. Adder's regular.
conditioning.
Generally
So,
better than his super
our
due to
main
the value
character,
difference.
who's a violent murderer,
Okay.
witness, is brought in by some psychologist.
Let's see,
some
what can I
therapy.
do with that next
And the
turn?
therapy he gets is classical conditioning. In particular, what happens is he's given a drug that makes him violently ill, extremely nauseous.
Ah, it
And
would have
his
been
eyes are
useful
propped
to
open,
use.
he's shown scenes of violence.
Would have been useful to use on the helicopter.
Conditioning. He then, when he experiences real world violence, he responds with nausea and shock. Basically, training him to get away from these acts of violence. In this example, take a moment. Don't say it out loud, just take a moment. What's the unconditioned stimulus? Okay, anybody, what's the unconditioned stimulus? Somebody just say it. The drug. What's the unconditioned response? Nausea. What's the conditioned stimulus? Violence. What's the conditioned response? Perfect. The third and final type of learning is known as operant conditioning or
Eagle.
instrumental conditioning.
Eagle?
And this is the thing,
There he
this
is.
the theory championed and developed most extensively by Skinner.
Oh, that's
What
useless.
this is learning the relationships between what you do.
This is the one he's really waiting on, isn't it?
Successful they are. Learning what works and what doesn't. It's important, this is very different from classical conditioning. And one way to see how this is different is, for classical conditioning, you don't do anything. You could literally be strapped down and be immobile. And these connections are what you appreciate, and you make connections in your mind. Instrumental conditioning is voluntary. You choose to do things. And by dint of your choices, some choices become more learned than others. So the idea itself was developed in the nicest form by Thorndike, who explored how animals learn.
3 tanks and an
Remember,
infantry. How am I
behaviorists were
gonna...
entirely comfortable studying animals and drawing extrapolations to other animals and to humans.
Should I buy a
So you
medium
would put
tank?
a cat in a puzzle box. And the trick to a puzzle box is there's a
I gotta
simple way to
protect
get
my
out,
HQ
but you have
now.
to kind of pull on something, some special lever to make it pop open.
No, I
Thorndike
don't. I might be
noted
able to
that,
outlast him
cats do
for a
not
turn
solve
or
this
two.
problem through insight. They don't sit in the box for a while and mull it over and then figure out how to do it. Instead, what they do is they bounce all around doing different things and gradually get better and better at it. So what they do
What
is,
am I doing wrong?
the
Probably
first
a
one
lot
might
of
scratch the
things.
bars,
Probably
make
too
it
much
silly,
than they
make it
can
howl,
explain
et cetera,
quickly.
et cetera. And one of their behaviors is pressing the lever. The lever gets them out of the box. But after more and more trials, they stop scratching at the bars, pushing at the ceiling, and so on. They just press the lever. And if you graph it, they gradually get better and better. They throw out all of these behaviors randomly. Some of them get reinforced, and those are the ones that survive, and others don't get reinforced, and those are the ones that go extinct. And it might occur to some of you that this seems to be an analogy with the Darwinian theory of natural selection, where there's a random assortment of random mutations and sexual selections give rise to a host of organisms, some which survive and are fit, and others which aren't. And in fact, Skinner explicitly made the analogy from the natural selection of species to the natural selection of behavior. So this could be
Should I have
summarized
used my
as a law
super
of
at the
effect,
beginning of this turn? Did I just
which is
waste
a
do a bunch
tendency
of
to perform an
stupid
action
stuff?
is increased if rewarded,
Ah.
weakened if it's not. And Skinner extended this more generally. So
What am I doing?
To illustrate,
I mean,
Skinnerian
I got one
theory
of their
and
units, but I don't know if it's going to be
conditioning,
worth
I'll
it.
give
I
an
need to...
example of
I
training
still
a
feel
pig.
like my HQ
So
is
here's
too
the idea.
naked right now.
You need to train a pig, and you need to do so through operant conditioning. So One thing you want to do is, the pig is going to do some things you like and some things you don't like. And so what you want to do, basically drawing upon the law of effect, is reinforce the pig for doing good things. Suppose you want the pig to walk forward. So you reinforce the pig for walking forward, and you punish the pig for walking backward. And if you do that, over the fullness of time, your reinforcement and punishment will give rise to a pig who walks forward. There's one technical distinction that people love to put on intro-psych exams, is that the difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Reinforcement is something that makes the behavior increase. Negative reinforcement is very different from punishment. Negative reinforcement is just a type of reward. The difference is, in positive reinforcement, you do something. In negative reinforcement, you take away something aversive. So imagine the pig has a
Oh, the AA is already dead.
the pig for walking forward, you might remove. So these are the basic techniques to train an animal. But it's kind of silly, because suppose you want your pig to dance. You don't just want your pig to walk forward, you want your pig to dance. Well, you can't adopt the policy of, I'm going to wait for this pig to dance, and when it does, I'm going to reinforce it, because it would take you a very long time. Similarly, if you're dealing with immature humans and you want your child to get you a beer, you can't just sit, wait for the kid to give you a beer, like ungrab the bottle, and say, excellent, good, hugs. You got to work your way to it. An act of working your way to it is known as shaping. So here is how to get a pig to dance. You wait for the pig to do something that's halfway close to dancing, like stumbling, and you reward it. Then it does something else that's even closer to dancing, and you reward it. And you keep rewarding it as it gets closer to closer. Here's how to get your child to bring you some beer. You say, Johnny, can you go to the kitchen and get me some beer? And he walks to the kitchen, and then he forgets why he's there. And you run after that, you're such a good kid, congratulations, hugs. And then you get him to, and finally you get him to also open up the refrigerator and get the beer, open the beer, and in that way you can train creatures to do complicated things. Skinner had many examples of this. Skinner developed in World War II.
This is game design stuff.
It was never actually used, but it was a great idea.
He's talking about
And people, in fact,
not
the history,
classical arcade game design, but like modern 40-hour long, the one game that you play and play a little bit every single day for several months kind of game design.
Other countries includes a lot
Where little things get built up over time into increasingly more rewarding loops of repetitions. At the beginning of my next turn, I really need to do my super. I'm neglecting it.
to do interesting and deadly things.
And Skinner is like this isn't a good thing. We're not gonna get there, but this becomes outdated, and everyone decides that if you raise your kid with Skinner psychology, it's not going to be useful after a certain age. Right. It kind of cuts off, I think, at 4 years old. Before 4 years old, humans are kind of like animals, which says a lot about your average gamer and how they design games for him. But past that point, humans become much more complicated and might want to play a different game design every now and then.
Skinner was fond of teaching animals to play ping pong. And again, you don't teach an animal to play ping pong by waiting for it to play ping pong and then rewarding it. Rather, you reward approximations to it. Now, basically, there are
Oh my god, did I forget to use my super this turn, or was that an earlier turn ago?
food, for instance.
Look at how many tanks he has. How am I going to match that?
Don't like being hit or
Surround the Skinner box with a compelling
in
story
the
in
real
art direction.
world,
You'll still notice the
dealing
Skinner
with
box if you're
humans,
George.
even
I've played
dealing
so
with
many
animals,
Skinner box
we
games that
don't
they...
actually always use primary reinforcement.
The one...
Negative reinforcers.
I like Hunt Showdown. I love Hunt
Are
Showdown,
things
but
like for my dog, saying good
but
dog.
it's like Hunt Showdown is like the peak of whatever the intersection between whatever pre-existing tastes I already had with the Skinnerian principles. And that's the single-player, atmospheric, narrative-designed stealth game that has an exciting beginning, middle, and end, and almost an Aristotelian three-act structure plays out in every match of Hunt Showdown. And as someone who is really who has been most impressed by video games when they are able to incorporate elegant and meaningful narratives into the game design, that that style of game that combines immersive single-player narrative design with the infinitely replayable human competition of multiplayer games with the modern, algorithmically powered heat map generation style of getting player feedback into the numbers of the thousands to make sure that every player's experience is optimized to some kind of grand average. It really feels like it's done. That style of game design is complete. That game has been solved. If whatever pre-existing tastes you might have had during your first 15 years of playing games, there's probably some kind of perfected Skinner box version of what you liked as a teenager that has now turned into a never-ending multiplayer microtransaction driven Skinner box. And that's what Hunt Showdown is for me, and why I have lost a lot of interest in modern AAA game design, because it all comes back to Skinner. Of all the creative ideas that we can do with our medium, Advanced Wars is not that. Strategy games are not that. But like the narrative third-person action adventure is really just devolving into a competition to make the perfect Skinner box, targeted at certain demographics for maximum market penetration impact.
Now, saying good dog is not something the dog has been built, pre-wired to find pleasurable. But what happens is you can do a two-step process. You could make good dog positive through classical conditioning. You give the dog a treat and say good dog. Now, the phrase good dog will carry a rewarding quality, and you could use that rewarding quality in order to train it. And through this way, behavior.
Okay, normal twice in a row instead of using super ones. Yeah. Let's do it. I'm starting to feel like I'm going to lose, but for a while I felt like things were going both ways and I had a chance. Maybe I'll get that feeling again.
Increase the utility and ease of training. Finally, in the examples we're giving, whenever the pig does something you like, you reinforce it. But that's not how real life works.
Also, the thing is that the problems that Skinnerian game design principles get. This is why I don't consider strategy games to be tempted to follow these principles. Is that the decisions that Skinner is putting these animals through are never interesting. They're not interesting decisions that require the true depths of the iceberg of the human brain's ability to think through. Whether or not you pick up the little herb that you hit every 7 seconds in your open world game is not an interesting decision. It's an optimal play style that is immediately obvious to anyone who cares about optimizing their gameplay and making sure that they are making the most amount of usage of the most amount of interactables as possible, to just pick up every single one along the way. It very quickly doesn't feel rewarding, and it requires no thought at all to make the kinds of decisions that Skinner boxes keep you going towards. Strategy games like to get you thinking. Skinner box games don't. I don't know if you can associate typical conventions of strategy game design with any famous psychologists, but I think at this point in game design history, it's obvious as hell that Skinner is responsible for a lot of boring trends in third-person 3D action adventure style video games, and it is so boring now. It is so boring for a grown-ass smart adult who has played those style of games their whole entire life to see it get to this point now.
Real life, for both humans and animals, involve cases where the reinforcement doesn't happen all the time, but actually happens according to different schedules. And so,
$25. Brain go big. The Super Buddy Hop experience.
Variable schedules and ratio versus interval. And this is something you could print out to look at. I don't need to go over it in detail. The difference between ratio is a reward every certain number of times somebody does something. So
There it is. He just said it out loud. So this was recorded in like 2007, when game design as a formalized school of thought had probably not yet been as formalized as it is nowadays, because upstart game designers were not watching Intro to Yale lectures for free on YouTube.
Your dog brought you the newspaper. You gave it hugs and treats. That's ratio. An interval is over a period of time. So if your dog gives you, I don't know, dances for an hour straight, that would be an interval thing. And fixed versus variable speaks to whether you give a reward on a fixed schedule, like every 5th time, or variable, sometimes on the 3rd time, sometimes on the 7th time, and so on. And there are examples here, and I don't need to go over them. It's easy enough to think of examples in real life. So for example,
Game design.
Slot machine,
Yo!
variable ratio. It goes off after it's been hit a certain number of times. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to do it, it's a number of times you pull it down. But it's variable because it doesn't always go off in the 1000th time. You don't know, it's unpredictable. The slot machine is a good example of a phenomenon known as the partial reinforcement effect. And this is
Partial reinforcement effect is game design poison.
But it's a sort of finding that's been validated over and over again.
God, and I hate that it's been validated over and over again. Oh, humans are so weak.
You want to train somebody to do something. And you want the training such
Medium
that they'll
tank
keep
near
on
HQ.
doing it,
Okay.
even
There's
if
5
you're
gray
not
tanks are gonna
training them
steamroll.
anymore, which is
Gotcha.
typically what you want.
A question though, Kerbaboy. Why medium tank and not rockets? My immediate gut reaction from playing the AI for tens upon tens of hours while listening to history and other lectures in my free time over years, would tell me that putting a wall of infantry with a rocket and maybe 1 or 2 tanks behind it would be more economical. But maybe it's because I don't have the time to make a wall of infantry at this point. Okay, maybe that's the thing. So, okay, one big difference, someone mentioned whether or not Civ was Skinnerian. I think the Skinner stuff, like, they never acknowledge long-term decisions, which is another thing why I really like Hunt Showdown above so many other games designed of that style, is like these animal decisions, training an animal, training a gamer, is they never talk about how they're trying to get the animal to think about something in the long term. You can slowly build your way up there, but only in small incremental steps. In a strategy game like Civ, in strategy games, most strategy games, you are going to be thinking the difference between being good and bad is whether or not you're thinking 3 turns ahead.
If you want that,
and so that thinking 3 turns ahead style doesn't necessarily seem compatible with a game design that is all gung-ho on reinforcing little itty-bitty things over and over again in small intervals.
the trick is, don't reinforce it all the time. Behaviors last longer if they're reinforced intermittently. And this is known as the partial reinforcement effect.
Partial reinforcement effect. I'm going to jot that down.
It's as if whenever you put something in a slot machine, it gave you money. Then all of a sudden it stopped. You keep on doing it a few times, but then you say, fine, it doesn't work. But what if it gave you money 1 out of every 100 times? Now you keep on trying. And because the reinforcement is intermittent, you don't expect it as much. And so your behavior will persist across often a huge amount of time. I mean, here's a good example.
Rockets are sitting ducks without good walls.
What's the
Those
very
tanks are going
worst
to
thing
break
to do
through.
when your kid cries to go into bed with you? And you don't want him to go into bed with you. Well, the worst thing to do is for any form of discipline with a kid is to say, no, absolutely not, no, 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 okay.
There was a sacrifice made at some point. I want to say, up until I heard Kerbaboy's advice, my initial gut reaction, my plan A, was to make an anti-air up here because of these helicopters. But maybe that's all because the genius big brain gamer on the other side is trying to distract me from my HQ. down here. Yeah, I'm getting it. I'm getting it. I'm getting it slowly. You guys are seeing the brain cells light up, aren't you?
And then later on, the kid's going to say,
Oh
I
yeah,
understand.
look at that. That's
And
they are kind of evening out.
you say,
Not
no.
really, but
Because the kid keeps
kinda.
asking. Because you could put it, the way I'll put it is in a psychological way, not the way the behaviorists would put it. The kid knows, okay, he's not going to get it right away. He's going to keep on asking. And so typically, what you're doing inadvertently in those situations is you're exploiting the partial reinforcement effect. If I want my kid to do something, I should say yes 1 out of every 10 times.
You need a lot of things you can't get right now. Thank you.
Because
Question mark? Thank
you
you?
nag. Person says, fine, okay, and that reinforces it. If Skinner kept the focus on rats and pigeons and dogs, he would not have the impact that he did. But he argued that you could extend all of these notions to humans and to human behavior. So for example, he argued that the prison system needs to be reformed. Because instead of focusing on notions of justice and retribution, what we should do is focus instead on questions of reinforcing good behaviors and punishing bad ones. He argued for the notions of operant conditioning to be extended to everyday life.
He's not
And
learning
argued that
about
people's lives would become
psychology.
fuller and more satisfying if they were controlled in a properly behaviorist way. Any questions about behaviorism? What are your questions about behaviorism?
He did the thing.
Yes. Good question. The discussion was over using things like poker chips for reinforcement. And the point is exactly right. Since the connection of the poker chips is established through classical conditioning, sooner or later, by that logic, the poker chips would lose their power to serve as reinforcers. You'd have to sort of start it up again, retrain again. If you have a dog and you say good dog to reward the dog, by your logic, which is right, at some point you might as well give the dog a treat along with the good dog.
Press the high tier win game button. Well, I had a good run this time. This time I did have a good run. There was a chunk in the mid game where I might have been able to snowball a victory. And that's, I think, the first time I felt it happen in one of these matches.
Skinner and Skinnerian psychologists were never directly involved in the creation of prisons. On the other hand, the psychological theory of behaviorism has had a huge impact. And I think a lot of people's ways of thinking about criminal justice and criminal law
It still has to get
shaped
infantry on the
by
HQ.
behaviorist principles. So for instance, institutions like mental institutions and some prisons have installed token economies where there's rewards for good behavior.
Game design!
No,
No, listen. He's talking about game design again.
Institutions by behavior.
Oh my god! Oh my god! So you're telling me that the most dominant trend in the past 2 console generations of AAA game design resemble the psychological routines used to train animals and rehabilitate prisoners? Absolutely no fucking wonder the teenage gamers from 10 years ago grew up to be fucked up.
Principles. So for instance, institutions like mental institutions and some prisons have installed token economies where there's rewards for good behavior, often poker chips of a sort, and then you could cash them in for other things. And to some extent, these have been shaped by an adherence to behaviorist principles. Okay. So here are the 3 general positions of behaviorism. That there is no innate knowledge, all you need is learning, that you could explain human psychology without mental notions like desires and goals, and that these mechanisms apply across all domains and across all species. I think it's fair to say that right now just about everybody agrees all of these three claims are mistaken. First,
Except game designers. Game designers love it. Oh man, and also the truth is not even the good game designers. Like the ones who are making the big bucks, monetization experts love it. Consultants on AAA action open world games, as opposed to the designers that probably came up with the idea from scratch, are probably the guys who turn some more interesting decisions into Skinner boxes and prison token economies. Yeah, a prison token economy isn't exactly a game of chess. It's significantly closer to vending machines.
Evidence for different forms of innate knowledge and innate desires. And we'll look when we'll talk about it in detail when we look at case studies like language learning.
Oh, look at that. He's got infantry.
Development of sexual preference.
On the HQ.
Developing understanding of material objects.
And on HQ, I think I should just, nah.
How much is innate and what the character of the built-in mental systems are. But there's nobody who doubts nowadays that a considerable amount for humans and for other animals is built in.
I feel like what he just said has been disappointingly, incredibly disappointingly, dishearteningly disproved by the age of this video. Social media really brought this awful psychology back in full force and proved that it works.
Is it true that talking about mental states is unscientific? Nobody believes this anymore either. Science, particularly more advanced sciences like physics or chemistry, are all about unobservables. They're all about things you can't see. And it makes sense to explain complex and intelligent behavior in terms of internal mechanisms.
No problem.
Representations.
Obama the hedgehog.
The computer revolution has served as an illustrative case study. If you have a computer that plays chess and you want to explain how the computer plays chess, it's impossible to do so without talking about the programs and mechanisms inside the computer. Is it true that animals need reinforcement and punishment to learn? No. And there's several demonstrations at the time of Skinner suggesting that they don't. This is from a classic study by Tolman, where rats were taught to run a maze.
No.
What they found was the rats did fine. They learned to run a maze faster and faster when they're regularly rewarded. But they also learn to run a maze faster and faster if they're not rewarded at all. So the reward helps, but the reward is in no sense necessary. And here's a more sophisticated illustration of the same point. And this is a sort of finding, an old finding from before most of you were born. That was a huge embarrassment for the Skinnerian theory, as it suggests that rats, in fact, had mental maps, an internal mechanism that he used to understand the world, entirely contrary to the behaviorist idea everything could be explained in terms of reinforcement and punishment. Finally, is it true that there's no animal-specific constraints for learning? And again, the answer seems to be no. Animals, for instance, have natural responses. So you could train a pigeon to peck for food. But that's because pecking for food is a very natural response. It's very difficult to train it to escape a situation. You can train it to flap its wings to escape a situation, but it's very difficult to get it to flap its wings for food. And the idea is they have sort of natural responses that these learning situations might exploit and might channel. But essentially, they do have certain natural ways of acting towards the world.
We're surviving.
We know that not all stimuli and responses are created equal. So the Gray textbook has a very nice discussion of the Garcia effect. And the Garcia effect goes like this. Does anybody here have any food aversions? I don't mean foods you don't like. I mean foods that really make you sick. Often, food aversions in humans and other animals can be formed through a form of association. What happens is, suppose you have the flu, and you get very nauseous. And then at the same point, you eat some sashimi for the first time. The connection between being nauseous and eating a new food is very potent. And even if you know intellectually full well that the sashimi isn't why you became nauseous, still you'll develop an aversion to this new food. When I was younger, when I was a teenager, I drank this Greek liqueur, ouzo, with
Oh, yeah.
beer. I didn't really have a flu at the time, but I became violently ill. And as a result, I cannot abide the smell of that Greek liqueur. Now, thank God I didn't develop an aversion to beer. But
The pipes in my bathroom are screaming.
small miracles. But
It happens.
the smell is very distinctive, and for me was new to me. And so through the Garcia effect, I developed a strong aversion.
I'm also hearing a fight in the parking lot. I got a distraction in one ear and a fight in the other.
A new food, and then you give it a drug to make it nauseous, it will avoid that food. But if you take an animal and you give it a new food, and then you shock it very painfully, it won't avoid the new food. And the idea is that a connection between what something tastes and getting sick is natural. We are hardwired to say, look, if I'm going to eat a new food and I'm going to get nauseous, I'm going to avoid that food. The Garcia effect is that this is special to taste and nausea. It doesn't extend more generally. Finally, I talked about phobias, and I'll return to phobias later on in this course. But the claim that people have formed their phobias through classical conditioning is almost always wrong. Instead, it turns out that there are certain phobias that were specially evolved to have. So both humans and chimpanzees, for instance, are particularly prone to develop fears of snakes. And when we talk about the emotions later on in the course, we'll talk about this in more detail. But what seems likely is the sort of phobias you're likely to have does not have much to do with your personal history, but rather it has a lot to do with your evolutionary history. Finally, the other reading you're going to do for this section of the course is Chomsky's classic article, his review of verbal behavior. Chomsky is one of the most prominent intellectuals alive. He's still a professor at MIT, still publishing on language and thought, among other matters. And the excerpt you're going to read is from his review of verbal behavior. And this is one of the most influential intellectual documents ever written in psychology, because it took the entire discipline of behaviorism, and more than everything else, more than any other event, could be said to have destroyed it, or ended it as a dominant intellectual endeavor. And Chomsky's argument is complicated and interesting, but the main sort of argument he had to make goes like this. When it comes to humans, the notions of reward and punishment and so on that Skinner tried to extend to humans are so vague, it's not science anymore. And remember the discussion we had with regard to Freud. What Chomsky is raising here is the concern of unfalsifiability. So here's a sort of example he would discuss. Skinner, in his book Verbal Behavior, talks about the question of why do we do things like talk to ourselves, imitate sounds, create art, give bad news to an enemy, fantasize about pleasant situations. And Skinner says that they all involve reinforcement. Those are all reinforced behaviors. But Skinner doesn't literally mean that when we talk to ourselves, somebody gives us food pellets. He doesn't literally mean even that when we talk to ourselves, somebody pats us on the head and says, "Good man, perfect, I'm very proud." What he means, for instance, this case is, well, talking to yourself is self-reinforcing. Or giving bad news to an enemy is reinforcing because it makes your enemy feel bad. Well, Chomsky says the problem is, it's not that that's wrong. That's all true. It's just so vague as to be useless. Skinner isn't saying anything more. To say giving bad news to an enemy is reinforcing because it makes the enemy feel bad doesn't say anything different from giving bad news to an enemy feels good because we like to give bad news to an enemy.
Oh yeah, I'm using every dirty trick I got.
More generally, Chomsky suggests that the law of effect, when applied to humans, is either trivially true.
I just want to survive. I don't want to win anymore. This is great. This is guerrilla surrender.
Scientifically robust and obviously false. So, if you want to expand the notion of reward or reinforcement to anything, then it's true. So, why did you come? Those of you who are not freshmen, all of you, why did you come? All of you, why did you come to Yale for a second semester? Well, I repeated my action because the first semester was rewarding. Okay, what do you mean by that? Well, you don't literally mean that somebody rewarded you, like gave you pellets and stuff. What you mean is you chose to come here for the second semester. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, but we shouldn't confuse it with science. And more generally, the problem is you can talk about what other people do in terms of reinforcement and punishment and operant conditioning and classical conditioning.
No.
But in order to do so,
Oh, I think he might finally have it.
punishment and reward and reinforcement in such a vague way that in the end you're not saying anything scientific. So behaviorism as a dominant intellectual field has faded. But it still leaves behind an important legacy. And it still stands as one of the major contributions of 20th century psychology. For one thing, it has given us a richer understanding of certain learning mechanisms, particularly with regard to non-humans. Mechanisms like habituation, classical conditioning, and operant conditioning are real. They can be scientifically studied, and they play an important role in the lives of animals, and probably an important role in human life.
No, I don't see a way.
They just
I
don't.
don't see a way to buy another turn.
Finally, and this is something I'm going to return to on Wednesday, actually, behaviorists have provided powerful techniques for training, particularly for nonverbal creatures. So this extends to animals.
There it is.
But it also extends to people who want to teach young children and babies, and also want to help populations like the severely autistic or the severely retarded. Many of these behaviorist techniques have proven to be quite useful. And in that regard, as well as in other regards, it stands as an important contribution.
And apparently game design. Skinnerian principles served as an important contribution for formalizing the nascent art and science of game design. Just thinking of it as a science is already kind of deflating me. Wow. And now we're gonna lose. I think I had fun losing with the last match. Okay, so what's my record for tonight? I think 3 losses of Advance Wars, 3 losses in chess, 2 wins in chess. 3, 6. I had a 2-to-8 win-loss ratio tonight. But you know what? I learned a lot about the bad, outdated psychology that modern game designers have gotten in the habits of using for the biggest, most expensive projects, or the projects that are most cynically designed to turn a profit over exploring any kind of new problems of the human experience. Game theory is surprisingly not that useful for actually talking about and understanding game design. Kind of misnomer there. I mean, kind of, but maybe not as useful as Skinner stuff. I actually want to read Skinner now, critically, with a mind full of hatred for the games I've grown tired of, and see if I can get something useful out of it that'll help me explain why I'm so mentally unstimulated with why I'm so mentally unstimulated with a lot of game designs these days. You're going into the deep end now, as if I've never been there. Eliminated by route. Look at that. He went for defeating every unit instead of capturing the HQ just to rub it in. Well, no, not like this. Yeah, no, it's gonna be like that. It's gonna be like that. I'm sorry. Game theory was also named in the pre-arcade days. Yeah, but what about the Oh, good. That was apparently a good game. I'm glad they think so. Named in the pre-arcade days. Now when did it's the late 1800s, early 1900s when organized professional sports become popular, right? Because the word game does not necessarily mean, it's kind of like relegated almost to gambling. I got into it in the Kriegspiel video, but it had fairly negative connotations, so describing things like prisoners in a dilemma and trolley problems as game theory would make a little more sense than our modern conception of games as being primarily associated with a positive, fun mental experience. Game theory video. No, that's such entry level, obvious. No, I'm sorry, Twisted Operator. We are past that. We're learning Intro to Psychology. Maybe later on we'll go through the whole Educated Imagination lectures. Those are about 6 hours in total, I think I remember. These Yale Psychology lectures, let's see, they're about an hour each, and there's 20 of them. Wow. Oh, the last one is called Happiness. Oh boy, that one's going to be depressing, isn't it? Yeah, that's 20 hours. Guys, kids, children, students, pupils. That takes longer. Most video games take longer than what we just did. There's 20 hours of that. And playing through an average Final Fantasy style RPG that was the usual style JRPG from the year 1998 onwards to now is at least like a 40-hour obligation. Listening to lectures like that while playing strategy games is fun. It's a way to create positive reinforcements with sitting to a boring old white guy talk about something big-brained. This is a great way to spend time. This is one of the best ways to spend time in isolation, loneliness in front of electronic devices. I want to shake everyone who is watching this by their shoulders and encourage this as some kind of hobby to truly, by the literal definition, enrich yourself during your free times. It is so incredibly rewarding, and as few videos as I've made in recent years, what I regard as a general like way higher uptick in quality that you got around the time I started making my own Iliad adaptation is due to this kind of hobby I'm now doing on stream. Yeah, this is a great way to retain information and consume things in a fun way that has not been available for free. It costs only time, and so figuring out how to make the time feel worth spending by just associating it with a relatively simple, okay, Advance Wars by Web is considerably more complicated than the Game Boy ones, but a simple strategy game or a simple puzzle game like Tetris or Advance Wars 1 or 2 that you can kind of look at the screen and instantly know what your optimal strategy is going to be, but the thing is still designed with enough depth and elegance that it can keep you going for many tens of hours. Something that's easy to learn, hard to master, where the controls will remain simple throughout the whole learning curve experience. Maybe Street Fighter style games could be a good thing to give a try to. I wonder if they are going to be too fast-paced though. Yeah, something about the turn-based nature of turn-based strategy games might lend itself to this style of consumption. But Tetris was the brain expander for like 2 years of my life during the worst years of the pandemic, during the worst years of my life since I was a teenager. Playing Tetris and listening to lectures was what snapped me out of depression. Yeah. Um, it's possible. It isn't easy, but it is possible. Woo! I'm gonna head out now. Once again, we went over time by almost 30 minutes, but I still need to figure out how to fully elegantly map myself onto Advanced Wars by Web here. One last question before I head out. What for the people who play this regularly, if they're still around, where was it? Kerbaboy. I don't know if Sulfur Runt is still around, but Kerbaboy. What do you guys do for your soundscape when doing this? What do you listen to when playing Advanced Wars by Web? I'm gonna run to the bathroom and pee real quick. I'm gonna refill my water. I just want to see the answer on text on the text chat because I am genuinely interested in what would be a good way to reinforce this thing, get in the loop of it. Earlier, I tried listening to Advanced Wars music itself, and I don't entirely know if it worked. It made music affects your mood, and so Advanced Wars music tends to be really fast and peppy and upbeat. But for a more competitive multiplayer game where you're up against real humans instead of AIs, it kind of encourages you to be aggressively stupid. That music, it subtly psychologically influences you into making some moves that might be strategically unwise. But thinking deeply about a topic that has nothing to do with the simple mechanical geometry of the game does lend itself to strategic thinking. I was really in the zone for quite a few turns of this final game. How long did it last in real time? There's no way that was 8 minutes. We went through most of the final lecture with it, so holy cow, that could have been a 30 to 45 minute game. Wrong Total War soundtrack. Okay, Let's Plays TV, Slightly Niche Gamer, YouTube Slop. Let's Plays, this might be a good way to consume some other games I'd rather not play vicariously through Let's Plays. Are the lectures on Nebula or Nil website? Yeah, Penta Penguin. Go to Yale's YouTube channel and check out the playlists, and you will be enriched. The next time I talk to you, Penta Penguin, your brain will be 2 sizes bigger, and you will probably thank me for that. I mean, if you're not into psychology, if you're not into figuring out psychological tricks to help snap you out of depression if you're going through a horrible time in your life, I did the Greek history lessons by Donald Kagan. If you can put up with some 2007 era conservatism before things really turned into full mask off fascism, you'll have a really fun time with that one. The Intro to Greek History course is a ton of fun. What is this? A frog ponder emote. Choo choo, frog ponder emote. And so that day, after what just happened, sociology. I have a degree in sociology. I think I already feel like that one is it's also incredibly depressing. It's so exclusively focused almost on minority issues that I think after actually having graduated with the degree in it, I find it is mentally exhausting to go through sometimes. What has been immediately useful is getting into psychology for snapping out of the depression and learning how to make better work habits and reactivate the passion and motivational drive for work. Neuroscience is the real McCoy. I wonder because I feel like there's a sort of a negative feedback loop where the Ouroboros keeps spitting its back end out at some point, where neuroscience and psychology and linguistics are all kind of sort of in competition of canceling each other out and rendering each other's theories invalid every time one of them is far enough, right? Anyways, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm just working off of what I heard from free lectures that are super duper intro level sophomore year stuff. But it sure is nice having a head full of at least way more of that than what you actually get when going through your own undergrad courses. I never did take an intro to psychology course, and during the pandemic, it would have come in handy. During the pandemic, social isolation, depression, it absolutely positively would have come into handy. Yes, you do. I'm wondering if we should pick this up next week. It definitely doesn't attract the viewers, but it did brighten my mood after a horrible, awful day where I did something brave and risky to fight my HOA. Listen to psychology lectures, play Final Fantasy Tactics while you're doing it to get pumped up to fight your HOA, kids. Use your gaming habits and the educational resources that are available now today to actually do something useful in the world to make it a better place, please. Don't just mindlessly consume the latest infomercials and commercials. Go fight your HOA or something.